Hey everybody, Sae Bae here. Now you can enjoy full video episodes on Spotify across the entire Sae Bae Cast catalog. Spotify premium users now have a completely ad-free experience. You can also access exclusive casts through YouTube membership, Patreon, or now directly through Spotify for just $2. A big thanks to those who support this podcast. And now here's my conversation with Mod Elena. All right, welcome to the Sae Bae Cast, number 228 with Mod Elena for her second appearance. Elena, how are we doing today?
Hello. Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I was just saying before the cast started that it feels like it's been a year since we talked last on the cast, but I checked and it's been 3.5 years, which is just
It's insane. Time
bizarre.
time flies. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And I didn't go back into the cast and check out every single thing we touched on because it was kind of a beefy cast for sure. But I'm really happy with the timing of this cast, and you agreed that like with sailing being officially announced for this autumn of 2025, you can finally start sharing more about sailing and all the good things that are like awaiting the community. So I think this is just excellent timing, and it's right before the sailing alpha, which I guess we should just touch on right away. So it sounds like, according to RuneFest, this month at some point we will be receiving the sailing alpha, which will be, I'm assuming, beta worlds. Can you explain a little bit about how that's going to work?
Yeah, that's right. So we don't know. Well, I kind of know, but I can't confirm 100% yet exactly the date of the alpha, but it will be within the next couple of weeks from when this is recorded. As for like how you access it, this will be on the beta worlds. But we're updating them with fresh little sailing icons instead. So it should be super clear where to go. But if you haven't been on a beta world before, what you do is you just go to the world switcher, and then you can see these like other colored worlds. I think they're purple, and they will have this little sailing icon. And then you just jump on those and log in as usual.
Now, how are those sailing alphas going to work? Because one of the things, and you had even mentioned it in our DMs before, that there was a sailing alpha leak from RuneFest that was posted on Reddit, and it got a lot of eyeballs. So, what exactly are we to expect with this alpha? Are you able to share kind of how it goes? Is it just the cargo little mission, or is there an expanded exploration of it?
It's funny you mentioned the leak because like we're still laughing about it internally. Like calling it a leak in itself is a bit. I don't know. Like I wasn't stationed at the LAN area. I was just kind of like stopping by now and then. But some of the people that I work with came up to me and told me about it, and they were like, "Yeah, we were just watching this guy recording."
Oh,
Like
that's
they,
hilarious.
they were absolutely fine with it. So like it's not a leak per se, but um we were fully expecting people to take pictures and footage and stuff of it. So
Okay.
it's all good. But yeah, like what to expect from it. In that leak, quote unquote, I think people were able to see the port tasks, which just has you like carrying stuff from your boat, or sorry, from the port to your boat, and then you sort of ship that to another port, and then you put the boxes down, essentially. Like that's pretty straightforward, but that's just one type of port task. So not in the alpha, but in the future, you can expect to see more types of port tasks as well. We have one that's left in as a kind of teaser at the moment, which is called bounty tasks. That will have you go and kill a monster until you get a certain drop, and then you will bring that back to the port. So the idea is that people at these ports around the world just kind of have their own needs and things that they need done, and they just put up this little notice of like, hey, could anyone sort this thing out? Or they need help basically, so you're helping the locals. But that could expand like really. I don't know. Like I could see it expanding a lot. I could see it being like, hey, we have this trade route being attacked by pirates, and I need you to go and like clear that up. Or
Mm-hmm.
hey, I heard about the secret island. Can you go see if it's real? Kind of thing. Like there could be so many different things. But anyway, I'm getting off topic here.
Yeah, no, I'm
What's
I
actually in the alpha? So
yeah. I mean, I'm looking forward to it. It seems like so there's a lot of stuff I want to mention. I have so many questions, but I'm going to try to keep it like structured in a way. So I've seen obviously a split in the community where our community is obviously very passionate about this game. A lot of players have been playing for like 20 years, and some people have already almost dismissed sailing entirely. Like they don't want it. But then you have a real, I would argue, I mean, and it's on the numbers itself, obviously the majority of the community does want sailing. They are in favor of it and they are very excited for it. And what is your feeling about releasing this alpha where all the players are going to officially experience it? Are you kind of anxious about how it's going to feel? Because obviously this isn't full release and there's still things that are going to get, cleaned up and stuff. And obviously this is to get feedback to improve sailing as well. But are you a little bit nervous of how it's going to be perceived by the wider audience? And also, do you think we're in a way going to maybe be pleasantly surprised with how it feels? Like where are your thoughts at the moment?
that's a great question. The developer and sort of yeah, I would say the developer in me is pretty confident. As in, I've played it a bunch. I like what I'm playing, and I've played the game for many years at this stage. I like to think that I've got a good gauge for what feels old school and not, and I'm pretty confident in the build that we have. I'm pretty happy with it. But there's always a part of me that's like, man, I've worked on this for almost 2 years now in total, like the new skill project in general. What if they hate it? Like there's always that voice in the back of my head. But realistically, I do think it'll be quite well received. We saw that at RuneFest. I had so many people come up to me and be like, Elena, I used to vote no to sailing, or I used to hate sailing, or I was kind of on the fence, but then I tried it and now I really like it. Like, you guys have done
Oh,
amazing.
that is
And,
great
and
to
that means
hear.
a lot. Yeah, that was a great confidence boost, and we saw that in the survey results as well. So we surveyed people at RuneFest and just asked like, "How did you like it? What did you think of this activity? What did you think of that one?" And like overall, the results were really good. Obviously, I know that sort of the audience going to RuneFest is going to be like slightly different because you're going to have people who are like they're diehard RuneScape fans, right? Like if you
Yeah.
pay money to go to potentially a different country to go to a convention, you're gonna like the game that you're there for, right? Like
Yeah.
you're gonna be excited. You're getting to see all your sort of content creators and the people who work on the game. So you're already in a really excited and elevated state. And so that's a consideration, right? Like we do consider that when we look at the feedback and stuff. But overall, though, super positive. I do know that there's a lot of people who are still skeptical to sailing, and I fully expect there to be some negativity still. I know that there will be people going into it purely looking for something wrong, if that makes sense. Like
Hmm.
as much as I hope and wish that people would go in with an open mind and kind of consider that, you know, uh, if they have been skeptical before, give it an honest try and see how you feel. But I do know that there's like a subsection of people who will go in and just look for something to blame, right?
Hmm.
Any reason not to get it in the game. But I do like to think that the majority of people will like it because, I mean, both me, myself, and the team behind me as well, they really like it. So yeah, fingers crossed. We've also done, that reminds me actually, we've done a bunch of sort of uh, play testing that we haven't talked too much about, as in, we've got people to remote into the office to try sailing. So, like, players picked out from past surveys who've said they'd be interested in giving feedback have then been randomly selected to try it out. So we've had all of these sort of like closed alpha tests as well that we haven't really talked much about, but there's been quite a few people who have tried it out so far and they've all also really liked it. So yeah,
Oh,
fingers crossed.
that's really good. Okay, this is the question I have because it sounds like you had mentioned you feel like you have a pretty good grasp of like what's fun. You've been playing this game for a while, and for those that don't know, I mean, you have a maxed Ironman, got an Infernal Cape. I mean, you are like truly a scaper in my eyes, at least. So it's good to hear that you're excited about it. I'm curious though, because this is kind of like a similarity, but when I talk with YouTubers, like Settled comes to mind, and when he's about to publish a video, he tries to watch it before it's published and try to see it through the lens of somebody that didn't just spend a week editing this thing. So I'm curious for you, do you have some sort of way to perceive what you've created in a way with a fresh lens? I know that can be very difficult, especially with such a long, like drawn out project like sailing, and it's been going under development for a long time now. Like, are you able to put yourself outside of that and almost see it through the lens of a brand new like player experiencing sailing? I guess not brand new player, but a experienced player that's now seen it for the first time.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think that the honest answer is probably no. I can't 100% look past that bias or that knowledge, right? Like, I can't just forget everything that I know about sailing and try to see it from a fresh viewpoint. I can try, but ultimately it's not going to be the same. And this is the exact reason why we do those kind of play tests, right, with players ahead of time. We also have the benefit of sort of having internal staff that don't work on sailing that we can always grab for playtests and stuff. And that's been super helpful as well. So like getting fresh eyes from colleagues who like they know it exists, they know it's in the works, and they see updates on it now and then. But that doesn't mean that they've necessarily tried it. And so getting that internal feedback is really important to us as well. Yeah,
And
I think
yeah,
it's really true what you were saying though about sort of how can you distance yourself from the content a little bit? How can you see it with a different pair of eyes? I think one thing that I like to do is work on something and then leave it for a bit and then come back to it, because then you sort of just forget like all of the intent behind it, I guess. Which can sort of overshadow things. I think, like as a developer, I think we often have this. How do I put it? It's almost like a little rose tinted glass, right? Where you see things the way they're intended to be. And you
yeah.
know that with just a little bit more work in this area, it will be exactly what we want. But then to a player, they're not going to see that intent. They're not going to see what we wish it to be. They're going to see exactly what we put in front of them. And distinguishing those two can be really difficult
Yeah. Okay.
as a developer.
Like, so I'm assuming a lot of people at RuneFest and in the closed betas were obviously giving a lot of feedback. Was there anything in those surveys that was particularly maybe just, I don't know, like a stark difference in what you're questioning exactly in those surveys where you could pinpoint, okay, this might be an issue, or did everything across the board seem pretty good?
I don't think there was much that we didn't expect in terms of like people are always going to point out the things that frustrate them the most, right? Like
Yeah.
that tends to be what people highlight. In fact, when giving survey feedback, we have to at least like with the remote testing that we've done with players, we often have to make a point of asking them like, what was good? Like, what did you like? Because people tend to kind of forget when everything's good. Like, they just move on and focus on the bad stuff. But that's super important as well, because like if things are good, we don't want to change that bit. So that's really important for us to know. It's not about like, oh, we just want to hear that you like our content so we feel good about ourselves. It's not about that at all. It's about we don't want to change something that works. In the survey itself, though, people were decently good at saying what worked and what didn't. But like I said, the frustrations are always sort of the big focus. And one thing that I noticed was with the poor task, for example, and we even saw this in the Reddit thread, right? The leaked thread, where people were saying that it kind of looks boring to run back and forth to your boat. And the philosophy around that is that yeah, that's early game, but what if you at level 20 get a crewmate who could run that for you? And what if at level 50 you get this loading crane that you can build on the dock that just takes
Ooh.
all of the cargo onto your boat immediately? And so what starts out as like a mild frustration can eventually become really good reward space and like upgrades. So I guess my mindset around sort of the feedback that we're getting is we don't want to jump the gun and just like fix things when they're frustrating necessarily. Sometimes we do, right? Like if something is straight up a bug, obviously fix it. But if something is frustrating, we need to always consider whether it should change or if it's like a decent amount of friction to the point where you can live on that for like 20 levels and then get an upgrade. And that upgrade's gonna feel really good.
It seems like over the evolution of what at least I've seen personally with sailing is that movement was one of the largest hurdles to get over, just moving on the sea with a boat, especially because you don't just have one little boat, you got several variations of them, varying in size and everything. So it seems like right now, and again, according to the alpha that I saw leaked, no, it's not leaked, but it seems like the movement looks pretty smooth. And according to what you've told me about the surveys and having it across the board, a lot of positivity. Are you like exactly happy with how the movement played out? Because I feel like there's so many different variations of how that could have ended up being, especially when you're first like, I don't know, ideating about how this should work. Are you like completely satisfied with the system you guys have finally landed on? Or was there potential different avenues to go down where like, ooh, this movement system actually works really nicely too, but we've just decided to go with this one instead? Or is it across the board with the team? Like, no, this was just exactly what we wanted.
The movement was probably the hardest thing we've had to solve on this project, and it's been incredibly difficult to find something that works for old school, I guess. Um, for those who haven't seen the leaked footage and just might not be in the loop, I guess, the way that the movement works is that you just click in a direction, and then your boat will keep moving in that direction. And that's very different from how the player character moves, where you click on a tile and then the player just moves to that tile and they stop once they reach that tile. As the boat movement is completely different. We initially, when we started looking at movements, we just tried it the way that the character moves. Like, what if you just click to go to tile, right? And we tried that, put in the boat model, and it looked really, really weird. It was so strange. It just doesn't work with an entity that big. And we tried a bunch of different stuff. We tried with and without what we call perpetual movement, so that is when the boat just keeps going, right? We tried making it stop once it reached its destination coordinate as well, which felt kind of weird in a way because it makes sense for the player, but it just didn't quite stick with the boats. So as you can probably tell, though, from me explaining this, we've tried so many different things with how the boats move, and I'm personally really happy with what it's settled on now. I think we've had some pretty good feedback from players on it as well. At Runefest, there was this one guy who came up to me, and I wasn't near the LAN area, but he'd obviously been over there and tried sailing. And I kind of just stopped and talked to him for a bit, and he was like, "Yeah, the movement was clunky." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Like, what would you like to see it be?" And he was like, "No, in a good way. It's old school clunky." So I was like, "Oh, okay, good."
Charming clunky. Love it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, but
yeah.
I guess like, it's the eternal question of like, what is old school? What is content, like what does content need to do to feel old school? And I guess in terms of the movement, it just needed to feel the appropriate amount of clunky for it to feel old school, which is, I think, a compliment that we succeeded at that, but I don't know.
So
I
I
have
haven't.
also heard that people think it's really snappy, as in like it does react to you clicking every tick and stuff like that. So that's quite good.
That's good.
Sorry,
That's
go
good
on.
to hear. No, I was just gonna say I actually have it pulled up on my end, so those watching either on Spotify or YouTube can see it now, and it does look charming. It does. Like I'm curious, how the real feel of it feels long term and everything, because that's, I think, something I've been pretty well known to like criticize when it comes to certain bosses that have released in the game. Like it can feel good for the first 15 minutes. How is it going to feel 50 hours in? You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
and ultimately, I like there is no, in my head, again, I didn't work on sailing, but it's like I don't know what would be the perfect solution. And also I'm excited to just see what everyone else thinks, how I feel about it. I'm definitely going to be plunging into the sailing alpha and just trying to see it with a long-term lens of like, how is this going to feel 4 years down the line? And one of the things that I have to ask is, how are you guys going to solve just the vast amount of players on the sea? Are you going to be seeing everybody out on sea if you're on a world, or is there going to be some like disappearing entities if there's just too many people crowded in an area? And how is that all going to work out?
So we've got a couple of things in to sort of solve this in a way. The first thing is that if your boat overlaps with someone else's boat, it will sort of flatten their boat, as in like it will just look like a shadow on the floor,
Oh,
like the
okay.
outline of their boat. Which means that, you know, things don't get too cluttered. Obviously, you can still see a bunch of shadows and a bunch of other boats around, but at least sort of the surrounding area near your boat is going to be relatively clear. But we also have the ability to sort of hide other boats to a certain extent. Like we could say, only keep like 10 boats in view at a time, and that will keep obviously your own boat or the boat that you're on, and then like a random selection of other boats. Now, what we want to do with that as well is sort of try and prioritize which boats to show, so that, you know, like you probably want to show your friends and clanmates and stuff like that over some random person.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And how large do these boats get? Because we're seeing, this little 4 log, little plank makeshift boat. How big do these get? And are you satisfied with like the sizes that you guys have come up with?
I think that the biggest one, so in the alpha, you can try the raft, as we've called it, which is the 1x3, that you've probably seen already. And then you can try a bigger boat that is actually a boat this time, and I believe it's a 2x5. And we have one more that's in the works at the moment, which is a 3x5 as well. So it feels slightly bigger. We'll have a bit more space to move around and a bit more space to sort of like build facilities and stuff on the boat as well. But that won't be playable in the alpha at least. But you'll get the feel for 2 different boats. Yeah, the boat question is that we have internally at least is like, how many boats can we do and how many boats do we need for launch? Because we have
Hmm.
so many things we want to do, and it's a constant battle of like, you know, is it more important for us to make another type of NPC for us to fight, or is it more important for us to make, you know, another thing for you to upgrade on your boat, or should we make a whole new boat? Like all of these things are a constant battle for us to try and figure out what needs to be in for launch.
And how
I
many?
think in terms of, oh, sorry.
Oh
I was
no,
just
so,
gonna say in
yeah, go
terms
for
of
it.
like types of boats and stuff. I think at least 3 types of boats is needed for launch. I would like to see maybe one more, and then in the future as well start to expand into like different sort of styles of boats. So I would love to have like a Fremenic boat at some point.
Yes. See, that's one of my other questions is I love customization in this game. I just love being able to like pimp out your character. And I've always been a huge fan of just dumping cosmetics into this game because you just have so many options into, how you look. So are you guys focused on that in any way, trying to like be able to pimp out your boat? And I'm also curious, are these boats going to cost? Is there going to be sort of like with the construction skill, you have to pay a good amount of money to get the good stuff. I'm curious, are you going down that route with sailing where you have genuine like signature boats that just cost a fortune to get, or is that just not really on the table at the moment?
That's a good question. I think at least like the early game boats, the raft and the small boat should be relatively cheap. Just, somewhat related to the levels that you get them, I suppose. At the moment, you get the small boat at level 10. So it's not like we can charge extortionate amounts of money for that. But I would like to see, higher level boats be quite costly. We're also considering this from the perspective of the upgrades to your boat. So the way that upgrades will work is that there will be different sections of your boat that you can update or upgrade. So the sails and the mast is sort of like combined into one entity that you can upgrade. And that will give you some benefits. I believe at the moment, what it will do is it will affect sort of the amount of time that you're speed boosted if you get a speed boost. So obviously having a higher tier sail is good because you'll just generally go faster. And then there's the hull of the boat, which gives your boat more HP, so you're going to be tankier, which is good both for combat and for dangerous areas that you might go sailing in. And yeah, we have tons of like upgrade spaces that are sort of core parts of the ship. But then, sort of related to that, you also have the facilities on the boat that are more like the hotspots in the POH, where you can build something that then exists on that boat. So in the alpha, you'll get to try that out, both the upgrading of core components and the facilities as well. So you can build stuff like salvaging hooks to go and try shipwreck salvaging, or you can build a cargo hold to keep your stuff in. You can build a cannon, although we're not introducing combat just yet. It needs a little bit more work before we're happy to show it off. But yeah, there's tons of stuff for you to build. We also have this thing called a wind catcher, which is a facility that affects the way that you get speed boosted. So sorry, I'm going on a wild tangent here.
I'm
but
all
I hope
about it.
that's okay.
I'm very much into this, so just keep going. Like this is
Awesome.
all amazing info.
Great. Okay, so we've made a bit of a design change where we used to call, like every 30 seconds, your sails used to luff. Like that was pretty core to sailing. We've sort of thematically changed this a little bit. So now instead of the sails luffing, it's the wind picking up. So like there's a gust of wind that you notice. You feel this gust, and then if you trim your sails at that time, then you get a speed boost and you get XP. So the gameplay interaction hasn't changed, but just thematically, that is now a gust of wind instead of the sails luffing. But anyway, what the wind catcher does is that if it's built on your boat and if it's activated, so you just toggle it on or off whenever you want, if it's activated and you trim your sails, it makes you store that speed boost instead of using it. So just imagine like the little red mushrooms from Mario Kart, right? It's like picking up one of those, and then you can like release that whenever you want. So imagine you're trying to race through something and you have the speed boost coming up right before a sharp turn. You might not want to speed boost into the turn because you're not going to make that turn. But if you enable your wind catcher, you store that speed boost and then you make the turn and then you release it, then like you're going to be flying through the course. So
that is really cool. How many
like that, yeah.
How many gusts of wind are you going to be able to collect at a time? Is there going to be like a limit, or can you upgrade the limit even?
At the moment, it's 3.
Okay.
I do like the idea of upgrading it though. So like maybe you start out with a basic wind catcher that only has 1, and then eventually you can have up to 3.
Now,
that'd be pretty cool.
How many players are going to be able to be on a boat at a time? And there's a few questions on this. I guess I'll list just a couple more. One is, are Ironmen going to be able to go on other people's boats? Are other people going to be able to go on Ironman's boats? Is there going to be some collective sailing XP that's gained by leeching onto somebody else's boat? How is that all going to work? Can you share?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, people can go on anyone's boat as long as you. It basically follows the privacy settings in the POH. So like, if your private is off, no one can go on your boat. If you let them on, they can go on your boat. Ironmen can go on other people's boats, but they're quite restricted in terms of what they can actually do on the boat. So it's more like a. It's not a great way for an Ironman to get XP, for example, but it could be used as like a ferry service, I guess. Like, hey, I forgot my boat on this island. Can you take me out to that island, for example? Like that
Mm,
could be fine. Or just, you want to hang out with people like that. That's fine as well. We have been playing around with this sort of system of if you had built the facility yourself in the past, as in like let's say that there's like I don't know, like a tier 60 salvaging hook, right? You've built that on your own boat as an Iron Man. And so now, when you go on my ship, you're allowed to use that because you've technically upgraded that before. It's like you have that tool, you've done it, so you may still use it like,
that's nice.
even though
That's
it's
good to
mine.
know. So there's no real advantage. You can't just leech from a level 1 sailing account and use all the facilities. As long as you've gotten them, though, you can use them on other people's ships.
That's what I want it to be, at least. Like, it's very important for us that you can't leech. And so, like, that is the first rule, I guess, is that we need to block people from leeching. And then the second one is we still want to enable social gameplay like that. So we should make an effort of enabling that where we can. It's going to get quite tricky because of the sheer amount of facilities that you can build. And we kind of have to store all that data on the player, right? So, like, oh, you've built a facility of this tier, and now you've built a facility of like you've built both the level 40 and the 60 salvaging hook. It might get a bit strange. So an alternative way of doing that is just going by sailing level, or if there's a very special hook, to say that we only care about the data for those. So, like, one example is, let's say that there's a big shark that you can kill at like level 80 sailing or something like that. And it drops a tooth, and you need that tooth to build the best salvaging hook. This is purely an example, by the way. This is not actually in game. But say that you needed that shark tooth to build the best salvaging hook. Now, if the iron has done that, they, in my opinion, should be able to use that salvaging hook regardless of whose ship it is on. So we might just do it for more special cases like that one, rather than and just disable it for other cases. Is what I'm saying.
And how like efficient will it be? Let's just imagine, just take Iron Man out of the equation right now. Is it going to be reasonable to gain sailing XP? I mean, I imagine it's not going to be best. I'm assuming almost Barracuda trials, which we haven't touched on yet, and we'll touch on in a second. But like, I'm assuming that's going to be the really sweaty sort of gaming where you're like XP driven. But I'm curious, and this is something I've mentioned on plenty of casts just in the past few months. I've just been kind of like hypothesizing, will it be worth it to go on other people's ships for XP? Or is that just going to be, I just want to mess around and XP waste and I'm just going to go on somebody else's ship?
So the philosophy around it at the moment is, if you want to go on someone else's ship, it is probably mainly as a social thing. It's not going to be the best XP, because if we open up that door, if we say that the best XP is done with other people, you're kind of just introducing this oldscape meta,
Yeah.
right, for people, which we know that people don't want. And so that is like a big thing for us to consider when balancing XP with other people. So we want to let you train on other people's boats, but at the same time, it can't be that great. So some things we've had to limit. So stuff like port tasks, for example, are individual. You can't put your cargo on someone else's boat and then have them ferry it somewhere, right? Like that doesn't really work. Because then technically you could just send out a bunch of people to different places, and then you could teleport around and just deliver it yourself, right? Like you could abuse that so hard. So we've had to limit some things like that. One thing that we are allowing is the salvaging, for example. So salvaging is quite a social, like AFK method, I would say. It's kind of, to me, it reminds me of shooting stars in a way, where you're all just kind of piling around this one node, I guess, and getting resources from it. I guess it's also similar to woodcutting in a way. But anyway, multiple people can engage with the salvaging hook on the boat, so you can both sort of be getting salvage from this thing at the same time.
Okay. So this is something I need to bring up. I am looking right now at a map, which is like a leaked version of the world map, I guess. So not leaked. I keep saying the word leaked, but it's basically like this is what looks like it's about to come into the game with sailing, which is a bunch of scattered islands everywhere.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're quite fully designed yet. I'm just looking at it, just looks like there's not much going on these islands. I'm assuming for the future, these will have some like extra amenities and stuff on it. But I'm curious, like, are these islands, are most of them going to be locked from, say, like, so you must do sailing in order to access these islands, or will there be a way to go there if you wanted to, let's just say, for some odd reason, be a sailing pure where you're just one sailing? Like, are you going to be locked out of these new locations?
I would say the way to reach them initially is with sailing. I think now and then, as an exception, we can consider like letting other people just kind of bring you to that island. But what I would really like to see as well is in like us introducing teleports to various places. So for example, the Great Conch is this huge new island that we're introducing. It's south of Menopause, and that's where the Tortugans live, this new turtle species. I imagine that once you've sailed there initially, maybe done a quest or two, you get a teleport there, so you don't have to like sail there every time. But in terms of like unlocking it in the first place, you'll have to train sailing to get there.
Okay, that makes sense. And how many? Like, there's just so many different islands. Are they all going to have different things on it? Or most of them just going to be like deserted islands with a couple NPCs where it's not even necessarily a point of interest? Or are you really trying to give life to all these surrounding islands?
It's going to be a good mix. I think one of the things that excites me the most about sailing is the exploration aspect of it. So getting to actually see these islands for the first time, getting to go out there and really discover what is on the different islands, what exists at sea, because there could be so many points of interest that aren't islands, right? There could be this giant floating turtle that's just swimming around. There could be like pirate ships for you to board, like that kind of stuff. So in terms of like what exists on the islands, I would say a good mix of new and traditional stuff. So I really want us to integrate sailing well into the world. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to introduce more so traditional skilling methods and traditional content on these islands. So for example, imagine like a new orange salamander spot on one of the islands, for example. Like that's not something that you use a whole lot, but when you're on leagues or when you're at that level range, I guess, with hunter, or even just wanting to do a hunter task and then all of the spots are taken, I guess that's not really an issue anymore, but it was on launch anyway.
Yeah,
But yeah, like more so like side grades and more so these more methods of more places with existing methods, I think would be a good place for the majority of the islands.
and what are your guys' thoughts on new skilling metas with sailing? I know this is kind of a sensitive topic for people. It's so odd in a way because it makes perfect sense why new content should be better than old content. I mean, it goes hand in hand with PVM. Any PVM actual update, that's meant for, end game players. They're all upgrades. It would be silly for them to be downgrades, or silly for them to not have any real use. But with skilling, it seems like it's always like, okay, don't go above what's meta already and keep it tame and everything. But I'm curious, with sailing, is there going to be like some huge, like massive net fishing that's going to be maybe meta at all? Or is it just going to be a new AFK way to get a ton of fish? And obviously there's a lot of different islands, so different trees, I'm imagining different rocks to mine. Like, I'm just curious where your guys' stance is with new metas, as in, and what I mean by new metas is specifically the top end of XP for certain skills. Like, is there going to be any of that with sailing, or are you guys kind of a little bit hesitant on introducing anything like that?
It's a good question. What? So I guess the short answer is we haven't decided. That, like, the stuff on the islands is very much one of the later things in the project that we're doing, and we're only really starting to look at it sort of around now, basically. We've had a couple people lay some foundations and stuff, but the majority of island content is still to come. So I can't say for sure yes or no whether there will be meta changing stuff on there. But just from my design philosophy perspective, I suppose, I want there to be a reason for people to train sailing. As in, if you're an existing player and you only care about the skills that are currently in the game, the gear that is currently in the game, you care about sort of like being better at those things that are currently in the game, there should be some sort of incentive for you to train sailing, at least to a certain point, to get some sort of upgrade or some sort of reason for you to go and do that, right? That will then give you a benefit in the rest of the game. So just as an example, that could be, and this is just randomly off the top of my head, it could be a new good axe, right? That is better than the crystal axe for some reason. I'm not saying we're going to do this, but just as an example, maybe you get that from like chopping down the new rosewood trees and using that as like the handle. Combine that with your crystal axe, and then maybe you get like an even better axe, right? Like, that could be a really cool thing, and that would incentivize a lot of people to go train sailing. But exactly what that reason is, we haven't 100% landed on. We don't know exactly what those upgrades are and how many we're doing. One thing that we have to be really cautious of is we don't want sailing to be the meta for everything, right? We don't want that to be, you know, in OSRS's guide and stuff like that. You don't want sailing to be like the first thing that you do, right? You don't want it to be like, oh, now go to Port Sarim and train sailing to level 70 and do the rest of the guide. Like, that would really suck. And so it needs to be somewhat beneficial, but not too much so, because then it would just overshadow everything else. And RuneScape has this really precious sort of net of progression where you go train fletching to this level, and then you go train woodcutting to that level, and then you go train your slayer to that level so you can do this achievement area. So, you know, it's so interconnected and good that you would lose a lot if you could bypass a lot with sailing, right? So we don't want to do that. We want to be very careful with it.
It reminds me, I think it was maybe Josh's and Gaming I had on the cast, or somebody else maybe, where they were just talking about how brilliant RuneScape has been balanced, where like you still, like, end game players are sitting at the crafting guild in a free to play area. I mean, like, that's a free to play land. People are going to Lumbridge all the time and Alcarid. Like, there's just reasons to go back to these really old places where you started out. And the fact that you guys were able to balance Varlamore so well, where I know there's players that just haven't really even hardly touched Varlamore, and they don't feel obligated to do it. But at the same time, there's so much incentive to go out there, but it's nothing absolutely necessary. And I think the fact that you guys were able to just nail that balancing with Varlamore so well, I have like a lot of hope for sailing being very well just interwoven into this, like, again, like you said, like this like fabric of RuneScape, where everything just kind of fits good, and there's some metas here and there, but it's not dominating it. It's just like at certain points on the account, it can feel right. So that's
Yeah,
good to hear.
I agree. Valimor really nailed that because like the Hunter Guild is so powerful when you're training a hunter from 1 to 99, right? Like, but at 99, you probably don't care. Like, unless you're collection log hunting, then you might not care.
Hmm.
But at that point, there's only so many things that do appeal to you in the game, right? Like, you're pretty much done. So like, why would you go back and train an existing skill? Yeah, I think Voldemort is a great example of how they fleshed out the mid-level game quite a lot. And I think sailing has a lot of scope to do something similar. I'd like to see a broader range as well, though. Like, I think we can do like the odd thing here and there for like higher level things without necessarily creeping too much.
Yeah.
It's a difficult balance to strike, right? Like, as you say, we're naturally cautious with creeping on the metas and stuff like that. And I think the reason is they're very difficult to get right, and they're difficult conversations to have.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. I don't envy the position at all. This is why I'm always like so interested in just like these huge projects that are coming out, because I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, just the fact that you have a team working on something, and easily something could slip through the cracks of like, oh my god, like we didn't even realize that you can get 600k sailing XP by abusing this thing that we just completely overlooked. I mean, you're literally adding an entire anti-land mass. It's water mass technically, but like this just an entirely new area it's bigger than the land itself, which is just wild to think. So actually, there's a couple questions I have. That one is, had there actually been anything in like early development where it got overlooked and it was some really crazy bug in sailing that could have been like abused if it didn't get found out early?
Oh, um, I think maybe what I talked about with the port tasks actually with multiplayer, because initially when we made the port tasks, we didn't really worry about the multiplayer aspect that much until we realized that, I could just put my cargo in your cargo hold, and then you could sail to that port, and then my other buddy could sail to that port, and my third buddy could sail to that port. And I could just teleport around to all the ports and like hand those in when you arrive. So like that could definitely have been abused if we didn't catch that. In terms of other stuff, I don't think there's been too much. Um, yeah, I don't think we've had anything like that yet. Fingers crossed we don't. Nothing shows up.
Yeah, I imagine it's mainly due to just involving more players. That's when things get really complicated, and I've always been so impressed by being able to balance something like a raid where, I mean, I can't even imagine just the sheer amount of complexity it took to design Toa. Because in my eyes, it's just, okay, it's just Toa. It's like, it's what we see on launch. Like, this is great. But then you look at all the balancing and you have a 1 to 8 man thing and a just infinite variation of invocations, basically. I just cannot comprehend how that worked out so well. Like, that just seems like a project destined for failure just on balance alone, but somehow you guys managed it very well. And
Yeah,
yeah,
it's difficult, man.
things,
It's definitely difficult.
it's just like the MMO aspect, because, and that's why, and I'm pretty sure you can agree, like if you're designing a single player boss, that's so much easier to design with reward space and balancing and difficulty, and that's just it. But then as soon as you start introducing more people, it's like, okay, what's going on now? Like, is it too easy? Do we need to make it more difficult? What's the scaling going to be? Yeah, it's just it's a lot.
It's difficult, and sometimes it's a bit sad as well in a way because like what I mentioned with multiplayer earlier, we know that people want to sail with the boys. Like we
Yeah.
want to sail with the boys. We definitely want that, but we know that if that becomes the meta, people will sort of abuse it or even feel like they have to play that way. So it's almost like the more casual player who wants to just socialize almost has to suffer a little bit because we can't allow it at the top end, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. And we're doing what we can to still sort of try and make it social and interactive like that. But at the same time, first and foremost, it's a skill. What other skill in the game is actually impacted by other people? Like, primarily, it is a way of, how do I put it? Primarily, it's a way of showing your own skill set, right? Like, this is how good you are at something. So having other people affect that too much might be weird.
You're totally right. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. Just look at every other skill in the game. Everything really is you doing stuff. There's mini games, there's other things, but like you said, there's the salvaging where you can hang out with the boys when you're doing a salvaging like expedition basically, and that makes sense. But ultimately, it does have to be kind of like a solo experience with skills. And I think that is the identity of skills. I think you nailed it. So
One thing I really like to, or one thing I'd like to do, like I say, combat is still sort of in development. We're not quite ready to show it off yet, but we have a basic version of that working. And I think, to me, the boat combat shouldn't be great XP, but it should be more so rewards focused and focused on loot. At which point, I think it would also make more sense to lean into the multiplayer aspect of it. So I could just imagine, like, almost Sea of Thieves style, where one person is navigating, you got a couple people in cannons, and then one person running around frantically trying to repair the ship, right? Like that could be such a cool dynamic.
that would be amazing. Would this be like when it comes to combat on ships? I remember seeing this little demo you guys had. It was just like a 5-second clip of some guy like barraging somebody as their boats are crossing. Is this going to be more like combat with cannons, and so it's all about ship upgrades and what's how many cannons you have on your ship, or are you actually trying to get the player to be attacking across a different boat? And that's another question I have when it comes to like combat adventures. You said you're gonna be assigned to go kill some sea creature or something. Like, are you gonna be basing that off of your own combat stats? Is that gonna be like you going out there and shooting it with a bow and arrow, or are you going to be attacking it with your ship? And I also am curious, like, is sailing alone, let's just say combat is all focused on cannoning and whatever else you have on your ship, is your sailing level going to depend on how much damage you do? Is your range level going to count? Because that's usually how the cannons normally work. It depends on what your highest combat style is with what you're wearing. Like, how is this all going to work? Do you have any insight?
Yeah, so the way that we have it set up at the moment, at least, is that the cannons on the boat is the primary way of attacking monsters at sea. You kind of click to lock into the cannon. Kind of imagine what you do at BA, basically, where you like engage the cannon, and now when you click on a monster, like, oh, sorry, you don't actually do that, do you? You click on the egg, and then you just attack the closest one. So it'll be slightly different. But you click to like engage at least with the cannon, and then in sailing, you'll just click on the monster that you want to attack, and your character will keep trying to fire at that monster with the cannon. And
That's
this will
actually
be
cool. I actually
sailing it.
prefer that in a way, like where you're actually just clicking the monster correctly. You don't have to like line your ship up perfectly adjacent with it. Is that what I'm getting? Like,
So
you're just actually
that's
aiming at
actually
it.
the part that needs more work at the moment, because what we found is that you need to line it up somewhat, as in like, imagine drawing a line sort of straight through your boat, so that you have like the right half and the left half. I want you to be able to kind of attack almost anything on the right half of your boat if you're on the right hand cannon, right? But
Yeah.
that might look really weird if it's like really far ahead of your boat. So you almost need like a cone going out from your cannon.
Yeah.
But at that point, if something moves out of that range, do you then need to go back to the steering wheel and sort of rotate your boat a little bit to get the right angle at it? And that might get really frustrating. So that's the state of it at the moment, which is why we're not happy with it, which is why we're not showing it yet.
Well,
We need to figure out how that should work properly.
are these NPCs out in the sea moving a lot? Or I would imagine, at least in my head, they are just stationary and you just kind of go there. But are they actually like moving? And so it's actually difficult because you have to keep like moving with them. And is this, and also, you know, you said you're not satisfied, so it makes sense that you might not have all the answers to this, but I'm curious, like on these fighting adventures, this is where it seems like multiplayer is going to come in a lot more handy, where somebody is navigating and you have a couple people at the cannons and the expert navigator is just going to be constantly getting back into range with these monsters. And I could imagine, yeah, it would be such a headache doing this solo. Like,
Yeah. We've got a potential fix in for that though, which is crewmates, like NPC crewmates.
oh yeah,
Which is also not in the alpha at the moment because they need a bit more work as well. But I think that could be a decent way to sort of get around this. So imagine that you're on the cannon and you've got, you know, your little crewmate Bob. He's on the wheel, and you're trying to attack this shark, but the shark has just moved out of reach. So now you need to move closer. What I imagine you'll do is instead of running up to the wheel and taking control of it, you'll use something in your side panel to sort of yell orders at your crewmate and go, okay, I want you to move the boat a little bit closer. Which basically, I think how that would pan out is you essentially get control of the boat, but just remotely, almost like from the cannon itself. But narratively, you're just shouting orders at your crewmate to go do the thing. And so that way you could both be on the cannon and steer the boat at the same time.
okay. And are these NPC crew members going to cost like a butler does? Is this going to be like a constant payment system? How does this work?
We played around with that initially, but also I think that'd get really tedious. I quite like the idea of just unlocking them, and then once you have them, like they're yours kind of thing.
Is there like a one-time
Maybe
payment at least, or just completely free once you get the sailing level?
you would have to go and like speak to them to unlock them,
Hmm.
and we could add more requirements to that, right? So like imagine you save one of them from pirates, and then he's like, "Oh, thank God you saved my life. What can I do to repay you? Can I like work on your ship, for example?" And
Oh, that's
you're like,
cool.
"Okay, fine. I guess I'll allow it." Right? Yeah, I wanted to touch on the XP from combat as well because you mentioned sort of like the multi cannon, I guess, where you get ranged XP. But we've actually made the decision to go with not giving ranged XP, but giving sailing XP from combat. But I also don't want to be giving away like too much XP. Basically, I want sailing combat to be loot focused more so than XP focused, which means that you'll get a bit of XP for doing it, but you won't get a ton of XP for doing it.
Hmm.
And the reason for not giving ranged XP is twofold. It's a bit weird to require sailing levels for the cannons if it's range based, but then um, it does feel like a different cannon than the dwarven multi cannons. I think we can get away from that. But also thinking about this, the people who are purely skillers and wanting to engage with sailing still, by just giving sailing XP instead of ranged XP, you kind of just enable them to do that. So yeah, well, that's at least how it is at the moment. Obviously, we want the community's feedback on this sort of stuff as well. Like, if that feels completely wrong, like we can always change it. But that's sort of been the reasoning so far, at least.
I actually like that it's through sailing, because then at least skillers can still participate and shoot cannons. I think the only way I could see it actually working out, like let's just say the community is for we want the trickle ranged XP because it is a cannon and we're used to that. Then if you're a skiller on a boat, you could just have your NPC crewmate man the cannon and then you're not directly getting the XP or something like that. You could have some system. I don't know if that's the reasoning behind it necessarily. I'm also curious, are you going to have to fund your own cannonballs? Is there going to be Like, is this now just going to be like, are these the same cannonballs you're using with a Dwarven multi-cannon, the same that you're going to be using with sailing? And if that is the case, I am curious, like, there surely is just going to be a lot more cannonball drops coming in the future, right?
Yeah, that's a great point you're making. What we want to do is introduce cannonball tiers to go alongside cannon tiers. So I want the full metal range of cannons. I want bronze, iron, steel, all the way up to dragon.
Mm.
And I want the same for cannonballs. I want bronze cannonballs. I want the rare, exquisite dragon cannonballs that you can't even smith. You have to like get it as drops from different stuff. I think that'd be really cool. And I really like leaning into the traditional metals that, people are going to be familiar with that upgrade space.
That's cool. And are these going to be used in normal combat as well with a Dwarven multi-cannon, or specifically sailing?
I think it'd be a balancing nightmare to try and make it work with the Dwarven multi-cannon. And I don't think there'd be too much benefit to it as well. And it might also completely destroy the, what are they called? The granite cannonballs?
Yeah, you'd have
I
to.
kind of don't want to devalue those.
Yeah, that would be kind of so. Yeah, that's interesting though, because there would be two different types. One would be sailing specifically, like cannonballs for your sailing cannon. Do you think that's I mean, I definitely understand where you're coming from, but I just think it'll be weird when there's different tiers for cannonballs with your ship, but not anywhere else. I feel like people are almost going to want the other cannonballs for normal combat if they start being released to sailing. Do you see that being a potential concern of, like, as soon as you start releasing the dragon cannonballs, people are being like, why can't we use this for our Slayer task if we're super rich,
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'm open to it if that's what the community wants. It's just like so far it hasn't really seemed like a good use of our time, I guess,
Yeah.
like when you compare it to like all of the other stuff that we could be working on. I think we'll probably, because the existing cannonballs are just called cannonballs at the moment, we'll probably have to update them to be steel cannonballs. And then we'll explain in the lore somewhere that, like, oh yeah, the Dwarven multi-cannon can only function with steel cannonballs because of XYZ, right?
That would make sense. Yeah, and maybe, I don't know if this would be too much work, but maybe then your actual cannons on the ship will be dragon cannons. And those are the only ones that, or maybe those dragon cannons can fire dragon and everything lower, but you'd actually have to upgrade the cannon itself to get to the higher.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of how ranged works, right? Where you
Yep.
can't fire ammo of a certain tier unless you have like a good enough bow and whatnot.
See that?
Yeah, I'd like it to work that way.
That's my OCD and my like minimal lore. I need something to feel somewhat thematic, and that works for me. So cool, we got that settled.
Nice.
I have to say, I mean, you brought up just briefly, I just need to touch on this because I'm just so obsessed, but you brought up the Hunter Guild being just a great update and everything. But I've actually been doing a lot of Hunter rumors lately, and I kid you not, Hunter used to be one of my least favorite skills in this game. I just didn't like it, and I was so happy when birdhouses came out so I could just do it passively, sort of. And then herbivore was a good step, but Hunter rumors have literally changed my life. Like, I love them so much. They're so well done, and like, I don't know if you were involved in that at all. Did you have any like any sort of part in designing Hunter rumors?
Not really. I had a bit of oversight over it, but not really. Like that was all Mod Other. So shout out to her for an excellent job there.
So I'm curious though, because it's going to sort of tie into the philosophy with RuneScape updates, because I know I remember when like Artisan was a skill proposal years and years ago, before we were really actually getting a skill to come into the game. But people were kind of like gauging whether we'd want something where you have to do tasks for like all skills, and it's like a separate skill basically to do that. And I had always been against that for obvious reasons, which is like, okay, now there really is no just freedom of skilling on your own and, paving your path, it's all going to be through these contracts and stuff. And if you're not doing skilling through artisan, you're just trolling in a way. And I guess that had kind of fed into how I saw contracts in general with skills. But I'm not going to lie, like, they work so well individually. And I'm excited because sailing is going to have similar systems like that where you have contracts to do. There's something so special, though, about hunter rumors in particular. One is that when you get assigned something, it doesn't have to be the whole thing. You could just go there and, catch one chinchompa and you're done, and boom, you get the same reward as you would have. And it's just all RNG.
Yeah, you could be really lucky.
It's so good. Like that is such a cool system to have brought in. And so I'm curious with, and I don't know if that's exactly the reason why Hunter just feels so much better. I think everything's way quicker as well. Everything's more just snappy. Just the dialogues are really, really quick. Just click the NPC twice. You're out doing your next thing. Have you guys taken any of that philosophy and like moved it over to sailing in a way? Like, have you seen what works well? Because it looks like sailing does have a lot of contract vibes to it.
So it does have a bit of contract vibe, I would say, with the port tasks. It also has some stuff that isn't that, and I'm sure we'll talk about Barracuda trials soon enough. I wouldn't say we've taken too much inspiration from Hunter Rumors in terms of how those contracts work. Potentially the bounty tasks will be a bit similar, where you're tasked to go out and get a drop from an NPC and you need to use combat to get it. And that drop is random, so like you could get it on the first try. So that bit would be quite similar, right? It's almost like a Slayer and Hunter Rumor crossover in a way. I forget where I was going now. Hold on.
I guess we were just talking about, if there's anything taken from Hunter Rumors. And the only thing I'd really mentioned was just that quickness. Like, this kind of like, you don't know when it's going to end. It could end at any second. Is there any system with that, with just the typical cargo missions, or is it very basic where you're taking one thing of cargo and then when your ship expands, you can now, bring the crane on and you have a bunch of different cargo? Is there going to be any element of potential RNG with it, or is it pretty static where like, okay, once you have this down, it's just do this and there's no real, excitement?
Yeah, so for the courier tasks, I kind of wanted there to be this consistent element of, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking this box from this port to this port, and that's it, right? I think sometimes you want a bit of consistency, and I think bounty task is the way to spice that up, like if you want a bit of randomness. So having both and giving the player the option of like which one they want to do is a really good approach. I did remember what I wanted to say about Hunter, though. We haven't taken too much inspiration from like the contract aspect of it, but I think when you think about the skill overall and how you train it, it isn't too dissimilar to Hunter in a way. A lot of skills, like at least some of the gathering skills, they're really basic, right? Like if you try to explain woodcutting to someone, it's bring axe, click on tree, and wait. Like that's it. That's the skill.
Yep.
If you try to explain Hunter in a similar way, it's kind of different because sometimes it's place down, trap, and wait. But there's some nuance to that, right? And that variety of different sort of training methods is kind of a bit of inspiration for sailing, in that there's lots of different ways to train, and there's not like one way to describe all of it, basically, other than you're just a better sailor.
Sorry, I have another thing on my mind when it comes to cargo missions. I'm just thinking of thieving aspect with cargo missions. I'm curious, will there be the quote unquote legal cargo missions where it's done through, Karumja systems, and then you're going to have this is the black market. You're going to start dealing with some thugs and some pirates, and they have cargo missions. You're going to get paid better, but now you're going to have more perils at sea because there's pirates coming after you or something, or maybe even, the missions are just much scarier because when you're about to board to release these cargo, there's an RNG chance of some gang war happening right there on the dock, and everyone's going to start, shooting at you when you're delivering the cargo. I'm curious because that would be exciting. You could go the good route and get the basic XP and no risk, but then you can also have like the bad guy route where like I'm gonna get a lot more reward potentially, but I'm also going to be like an outlaw in a way where almost like, who knows, maybe you're an outlaw and you can't even go to like certain ports anymore because they're going to see your face and be like, you can't dock here, what are you doing, like you're an outlaw. Have you guys thought anything of that? Obviously there's like so much that you could expand with sailing, and there's just so much you have to just get nailed down right before autumn, obviously, but have you guys thought of any cool systems like that?
It's a really cool pitch. I really like that. Um, the whole idea of like becoming a pirate is a really interesting fantasy, right?
Yeah.
um, I'm a really big fan of sort of. I mean, when we started sailing initially, we were like, okay, what do you use your boat for? Like, the boat is a tool. What do you use it for? And one way to use the boat, I guess, is to be sort of doing the legal tasks, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is to sort of like do the speed racing, which is the Barracuda trials. Or you could just go out fishing and be like more of a trawler type of thing. And we did research into like, what are real boats actually used for, like in real life, like what kind of boats exist out there. Some boats are like ships were just galleons, right? Like they're purely just fighting ships.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I'd really like us to try and lean into with our upgrade space, as in like say that you have a certain amount of boats that you can have. It's almost like you own this POH, but you can have like 3 other houses around the world or something. How would you set up your boat for the activities that you want to do with that boat? Like, would you have your skilling boat versus your combat boat versus your hybrid boat, for example?
Mm.
Like that sort of stuff is really cool. But like back to your question about sort of like outlaw and pirates, I don't think I can spoil too much about it yet, but we have something in the works that would involve pirates to some extent.
That is cool.
But it's a bit too early in development for me to say.
One of the things I've also kind of liked, I understand that RuneScape in a way is designed where you can do everything. You can train all the skills, you can do all the quests. There's something nice though about those little quests where you choose a side, like Shield of Arav and stuff like that. And so I think it would be really cool if you had that kind of like choose your own adventure vibe with sailing, where there's certain quest lines. You'll ultimately get your quest cape or whatnot, but there's a outlaw and a legal path to go down with like all these new sort of quests. And again, this is just me kind of just brainstorming. I'm sure there's already quests that are getting designed and everything. You guys have your layout, but that would be a really cool system to be like, are you a good, person out on sea, or are you one of the baddies, so.
Yeah, I really like that. It's always difficult, right? Because you want, if there are systems like that, you want them to feel impactful.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you have say that you could be good or bad, and like different NPCs interact with you differently depending on which one you are, we would be creating a bunch of content that you would never see because you chose one or the other.
That's a good point.
And that's always the draw of those sort of systems. But I mean, as a player, I really like it when games do that. It's just kind of hard to make work, I think, for a multiplayer one as well.
It would have to be something like the original pitch for Zaya, where like obviously it flopped, but like you would choose a house and then you could swap at some point, but you'd have to do a few like favors for some people and switch houses. But ultimately we just decided, okay, we just have every house because this is super tedious and obnoxious. But if it was just a good or bad side, it could be as simple as like, okay, I was an outlaw, I'm going to pay the fine, and now I'm a good guy again, and I can do all the activities that the good people can do. But then if you just, do some outlaw missions again, you can go to the bad side. But you can kind of like flip flop pretty easily. But I think that would be
Yeah.
a way around it. But ultimately, you're right about like it just not feeling quite RuneScape. RuneScape's always been like you could just have access to everything.
I think what you're saying would work though if you could jump between the two easily enough. I
Yeah.
think the problem is when you have like something where you make a permanent choice and
Hmm.
then everything else is affected by that. That's when it gets a bit tricky to maneuver. Not just from like the perspective of there's just going to be this whole part of the game that you will never get to experience because you made this choice, but also from the perspective of we as developers need to continually remember that this was a choice that could have been made, and so all dialogue going into the game from now on might have to consider that in some aspect, right? Like if we
Yeah.
make a guard somewhere out at sea, he's gonna have to remember whether you're a good or a bad guy.
That is a lot of code.
Yeah, but I
But
think in terms of when you mentioned like flip flopping between the two could work, I know that the Elder Scrolls has a system for that, right? Where you have like this bounty put on you when you do bad stuff, and then you could choose to pay that off, or you
yeah.
could choose to fight the law and keep being like fleeing from guards and stuff like that.
Or just have it as simple as, going to Shanty at Shanty's Pass and just, you go to jail. All right, I'm just going to leave now. Like, it's just like literally no, there's like nothing wrong. It's like, okay, like, I'm not going to pay you. Send me away. Hilarious. So let's touch on Barracuda Trials, which I'm very excited about. This seems like the quote unquote sepulcher of sailing potentially, where this is really going to test your skills on the sea. How are you feeling about that? And is this going to be the XP, focus? Like this is where you're going to be getting your XP.
Yeah, I think it's extremely likely to be some of the best XP out there if you're good enough. I think if you want sort of like if you're at, if you're not the best, I guess, at movement and stuff, maybe port tasks will be better. Like that's ideally, I think, where I would like to see it. But if you're good, then yeah, I think this should be the best XP because it's certainly at the moment at least the most intense stuff that you can do with sailing, and it really just does put your navigation skills to the test. Like it really pushes what you can do with navigation. My personal like favorite part of it is the fact that we have this whole new movement method, and when you're learning how to sail, you're doing a few port tasks, like you're kind of just getting used to that, and you might feel like, I got the hang of this now, like it's intuitive, it's fine. And then you go into this trial and it's like you just get so humbled initially, right?
Oh
Like,
no.
oh wow, I thought I could steer a ship and like I can't, but then I'm sure everyone who's tried the sepulcher as well like remembers this, like brick walling on floor 3 for example for a while,
Yep.
and then eventually you get it, and then that feels really good, and then there's like another 2 floors for you to get through, and you keep doing them and eventually it's second nature. That's what we wanted it to be, and to me, that's what it feels like as well. So I'm incredibly happy with where Barracuda Trials sit. And there is one available in the alpha that's coming out soon. A few people have tried it at RuneFest as well, and we got some really good feedback on it, which is awesome.
Ooh.
And what you mentioned there as well about like Sepulchre, like it is kind of like that because both test movement systems, right? Like both really push what you can do with movement. I wouldn't say it's as like, how do I put it? In Sepulchre, it's like you have to be tile perfect with some things.
Yep.
I don't think it's quite to that point in Barracuda Trials, at least not yet. And it kind of can't be with such a big entity that you're steering. But I mean, I'll let you make up your mind when you try it. There's definitely a lot of space for those to get harder as well as you get to higher levels.
Okay. That's actually probably good to hear. I imagine most people are not. I mean, I don't know what the data is on how many people actually participate in Sepulcher. I know that when I hear of people that, because I try to like motivate people to get into Sepulchre if they're just stuck at rooftops. And a lot of people that stick it through are like, thank you for just getting me in there because I love it. It just was such a headache at first, and now I'm absolutely just loving it, and it's so fun. But I am hoping in a way that Barracuda Trials maybe isn't quite as daunting, just so it's not such a brick wall like you said. But it is cool that
Yeah,
you said as
with
well that it does extend. Like you can see this actually getting more difficult if you really push the limits. That's cool.
yeah, we've taken some steps to making it a bit more sort of like, I want to say newbie friendly in a way, because I guess to cover the narrative side real quick, the Barracuda faction is this group of people who, they're thrill seekers. They're not necessarily bad. They're not pirates, but they are a group of sort of maybe the odd outcast here and there. And what they really love is just sailing, and sailing fast and doing risky stuff at sea. Sailing through storms, for example, which is what the first Barracuda trial is. Basically around Temperos, because Temperos is a big storm. There's going to be stormy waters. And so most sailors in the world, they're not going to want to sail through there. But if you're taking something from, say, Sophinim and up to Port Sarim, like that is the natural route to travel. And if you have to go around the entirety of Gramja, like that's going to take your route a lot longer. So naturally, most merchants and stuff like that in the game, they will want to sail there, but they probably can't because there's a big storm in the way. So the Barracudas, they offer the service of transporting your stuff for you between, sort of like the north of the storm and the south of the storm. And that's win-win because the merchants get their stuff across, the Barracudas get to do what they love, which is sail through dangerous stuff and, get the thrill of that sort of. They're into extreme sports, really, is what they like. And they also probably make some money doing that, right? And so as a player, you sort of participating in this, you're kind of becoming a Barracuda in a way, like you're doing the same as they are. And the Barracudas, because they're in it for the sport of it, they have these different ranks for how well and how fast they're going. And the ranks are all named after fish. So at the bottom you have like, well, unranked is also like a way to do these trials because you might not make things in time, but you can still get XP for them. So at the bottom you have unranked, and then you have swordfish. So
it doesn't
if
start with
you
shrimp. It should be shrimp.
yeah, maybe it should start with shrimp at the bottom. You have at the moment at least you have swordfish, and then you move up to shark, and then at the top is marlin. And we did
Ooh.
some research again here with marlin is apparently one of the fastest fish in real life. So
Okay.
it kind of looks like a swordfish as well, but it's like blue.
I like it.
But yeah, the idea is that like you need to select which sort of like trial you want to go for. So like if you try to go for say swordfish, the trial is going to have like a different speed target that you need to achieve rather than like, for example, let's say that on Marlin you need to do like 3 laps in 5 minutes maybe. But on Swordfish it might be easier, so maybe you have like 3 minutes to do 1 lap or something like that. And that way, like we can, obviously it's going to be less XP, but for the people who can't work at a Marlin rank, they can still have fun doing it. They can still feel like they're completing it, and they can still get, a decent chunk of XP, even if it's not the best possible.
And what are the rewards gonna like? Because this sounds like it might be best for XP per hour. What about GP per hour? Are you focusing on that as well to make this really the incentivized sailing method, or is it mostly going to be from other activities getting GP per hour?
I don't think we're going to focus much on loot for this one.
Okay.
Those are like two big balancing bits that, or levers, I guess, that we have with different content. And I think making something the best gold per hour and XP per hour would be a big mistake. You kind of just force people into a certain activity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to distribute that a bit more. Like I say with combat, like I could see combat maybe at the top end at least being some of the better like loot per hour. Maybe like on launch that could be amazing gold per hour potentially. Because imagine people wanting to train sailing fast is probably going to want to upgrade their ship, right, to be the best possible so that they can go really, really fast. But what if the resources for upgrading that ship only comes from other bits? So like you have to go and do combat a bit, or you have to do some salvaging in a certain area to get all the materials that you need, or only specific port tasks give you one of the materials. And so that way, when you think about like the whole economy, I guess, on release, you're gonna have people who they might not care about getting to 99 the fastest. They might not care about trading up their skill too fast. But what they care about is people paying extortionate amounts of money to be the first one to reach 99, right? And like they want to pay billions to get there. And so they will pay lots of money to get these resources that, like the average Joe could go and get. And I
Okay.
really like the idea of that.
Yeah, that
At
works
least,
nice.
for launch. Obviously, eventually that's going to even out and resources are going to settle. But I think on launch, we'll see a lot of people doing sort of like, things that won't get them a ton of XP, but it will make them a lot of money, at least in the short term.
Now, are you able to share on release what you're expecting XP per hour to be? Like, let's say at level 1 versus level 50 versus level 70 and maybe 99. What are the, again, like it depends on the activity, but what's going to be like the top end do you imagine at 99? Or can you share?
Um, so we have some documentation on this, and I don't remember off the top of my head. So I'll just kind of talk about our mindset around it, I guess. We don't want this to be the fastest skill that you can train. And there's a couple of reasons for it. We also don't want it to be the slowest for what it's worth, because we know that some skills are truly a slog, and we don't want sailing to feel like that. But I don't think it should be the fastest either. Essentially, how I think about sailing is we're updating every other skill in the game constantly. We added Guardians of the Rift, we added Sepulchre, we added, Giant's Foundry. We're always updating these skills in the game. And sailing will be no different. I expect sailing to be updated 10 years from now. And so, what's really important for us at the moment is building solid foundations that the team can then build on in the future. That might not be the same development team anymore that made sailing. That might be a completely different team. Maybe they're doing Volamore now, and then in a couple of years, they're doing a sailing update, right?
True.
But what's important is having those solid foundations for us to build on. And if we, on release, make sailing the fastest skill to get to 99 or 200 mil or whatever, then like you're gonna have it be crazy fast in the future, because inevitably we're going to want to update the skill. We're going to want to add new methods. We're going to want to add new things to flesh it out even more for years to come. And if we just release it the best, like the fastest it could possibly be, we kind of shoot ourselves in the foot a bit. We leave ourselves no space to do that.
Okay, so I that sounds actually completely reasonable. I actually like that explanation for it. What do you think at the moment then? Like, do you think because you're just laying the foundation that people might be a little bit maybe disappointed in how maybe they were thinking it was going to be faster, and now they're just like, oh, we have to wait years for it to actually speed up? And also, what do you? I know you said you don't actually have the numbers at hand, but what's a rough range of XP per hour you're expecting around level 50 sailing versus level like 90?
I would expect at the top end to maybe sit around like just below 100k maybe an hour, like at the very top end. I'd probably want that. That's still like decently fast, but it's not, the slowest. At 50? Huh. I'm trying to think what other methods are at 50. I actually don't know off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
I mean, does this like scale pretty decent? Like, is this gonna feel like, again, I'm not trying to compare it to agility. I'm just, when you start with agility, you're getting like 15k XP an hour, and then as soon as you get to level 50, you're getting like, maybe 40k, and then at the top with rooftops, you're getting about 70k. So I'm just wondering, is that gonna sort of be the scaling, or is it gonna be a skill where, I mean, it feels like you hit level 50 sailing within 2 hours. It was just like so fast. Like, does it scale pretty properly in that regard, or I don't know. Like, I guess there's just so many questions. Also, I gotta say, 100k an hour, that's actually lower than I was expecting, but
It might settle on a bit higher. Honestly,
yeah.
like I don't recall what numbers we had on it, so I was a bit sort of conservative in my estimate here, but yeah, I would think that's a very safe bet at least to go for.
And
Actually higher. I mean, yeah.
are you thinking that's going to be more for like the casual at level 99? They're going to be getting that rate, or are you thinking like, no, like the top end Barracudas are going to be getting about 100k, or do you think it's going to be much higher for those top end players?
We wouldn't want the discrepancy between the two to be too high. Like, it should be rewarding to put more effort in 100%, but at the same time, I don't think it shouldn't like double your XP per hour or anything like that,
Okay. How is that going to be to balance? I'm just curious, because like, when it comes to, let's just say, you have two people just trying to do sailing quickly, but some guy's on mobile and he doesn't have good taps on his phone. And so he's just doing the swordfish Barracuda trial, and the other guy's doing Marlin, on the PC, and he's just has it mastered. I mean, I feel like there's almost no way around that XP per hour discrepancy. It's like I just think about Sepulcher, and I think about somebody that's mastered it versus somebody that still has floor 5 unlocked but isn't looting and has to use a hallowed symbol or a token or whatever, like here and there, because they're not getting it in time. But like those XP per hours are pretty widely, I don't know, they're different, like they're significant. So I don't know, like,
I guess the way
yeah.
I would see it is, I wouldn't expect someone then to be doing Barracuda trials if they wanted the best XP per hour, but they were bad, if that makes sense, right?
I see.
They might be doing port tasks instead, which might at the top end be closer, but still less than Marlin rank.
Okay.
So it's almost like saying, imagine that RD rooftops was like, I don't know, like 80k an hour, and then Sepulcher 100k. Like, there's a difference there for sure, but it's not huge. And so, like, you still get, the best XP for putting the most effort in. But the guy who can't do Sepulcher, he can still get, a decent amount from RD rooftops.
I see. That's actually a good example to bring up, because when you're learning Sepulcher for the first time, you're not even going to be getting RD rates at that point, but you can build up to it if you
it's
care
going to be bad. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where the rank system comes in good again, because like it's not just about giving people who are like, I say they're bad, but like they might just be inexperienced, right? Like,
they're just being
the first
thorough.
time you're doing it, you're not going to get Marlin.
Yeah.
Like that's a fact. And so I guess the way I see it is, this is a great way to train as well, as in like for you, not your character training, but like for you to get better at clicking and moving.
Yeah. Okay. I have another question. This is kind of interwoven with the rest of the game. Do you guys have any plan to have alternatives to, let's just say, traveling to I'm spacing the name of the place where you go and fight Elvarg. What's that island? I can't even think of it right now.
Crandor?
Crandor. Are you gonna? I'm curious if there's gonna be any like expanse on the quest dialogues where like you already have your own ship, you don't really need Ned at this point. I mean, is there going to be a route to be like, I have my own ship, step aside, or I'm not going to have my teammates get burned alive right now with this cutscene, I'd rather just go there myself? Like, is there going to be any options for that, or is that just way too overly complicated?
So we have allocated a bit of time to review past quests that touch on sailing or where sailing would be relevant. So, as you say, like Dragon Slayer 1 comes to mind, and Bon Voyage is another one where, like, no one really enjoys that sailing section of it.
I always love
Uh,
how just massive the boat is right there too. It's like this thing could
oh,
barely
it doesn't even fit down the river.
I know. Makes no sense.
It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. But yeah, we have some time allocated to reviewing these and seeing what we can do to sort of either, just make the dialogue make sense at least. Like, oh, I would sail, but I'm sick, or something like that. Or Ned knows these waters better than I do.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. Or, perfect world, we make you sail as like an option. Like Ned could sail, or you could sail if you wanted to. Like that could be really cool.
Yeah, I think that would
Um,
actually be. I think that would be the optimal route, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy,
yeah.
but just
It
allowing
just
that.
comes with a few considerations. Like we have to think about like if you get is it the Lady Lumbridge? I think the boat is called the ship.
Yeah, something like
Um,
that. You're right.
if you get to steer that for the quest, do we have to go and like make sure that you can't go anywhere else on the sea? Like how's that gonna work? Can you just like never actually complete the quest and then you have this big ship that you can use wherever? Like is that
Yeah, that's a good point.
it has some considerations, but I mean, overall, though, I do like that approach the most. It's just about, like how much time should we really spend on that kind of stuff. But yeah, definitely we are like revisiting it and having a look. I've also had the question many times about sort of what we're doing with XP from that, because technically you are sailing, at least in Bon Voyage you are. So should you get sailing XP for completing that quest? And even should it require sailing to do the quest? And so our thinking is any quest that is already out should not require sailing. So Bon Voyage, for example, would never require sailing because that would be unfair for the people who have completed it already and didn't need to train sailing first, right?
Hmm.
But in terms of sailing rewards, we're not opposed to actually giving you a bit of sailing XP for completing those. So, like, it would make sense for you to get an XP lamp for sailing after completing it. I could see us doing that for a couple of quests that sort of involve sailing. There's one of the pirate quests as well where you're like fighting a pirate ship and stuff like that. So,
Yeah. Okay. That sounds really reasonable. I always hear suggestions as well of like this mainly comes from Snowflake account players that are saying like, how do you feel about just all quest reward XPs being optional? Have you guys ever thought about that? Is there a reason why? I already know reasons why. Obviously, you shouldn't be doing certain quests if you're not getting the XP for it. But it seems like there's already been exceptions made. And ultimately, if you're a Snowflake build, this is not allowing you to just do all quests. You still have to have the requirements, obviously, but being able to optionally accept XP rewards or not. I know this is kind of like a side tangent, but have you ever thought about that? Where do you stand?
personally, I'd be fine with every quest being an XP lamp. I don't feel strongly either way. I do think that the reason it hasn't been done is just like that's not universally been agreed upon with the community, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
people are against it. They feel like they earned their achievements, whether that be on a Snowflake account or you know without one. But they feel like this should require a certain level and whatnot. Um, I like I say, don't feel strongly about it. It does feel like there's been a bit of a shift though, as with recent quests, I think most of them do give XP lamps rather than just straight up XP.
Hmm.
At the very least with combat. So that seems like the direction that we're going in with them. But whether we'll go back and update existing quests, it's probably like a bit outside of my remit. But yeah, I could see it being brought up potentially as a poll question at some point. But I know people feel strongly.
Okay, now I have a big question, which is sailing PvP. Is this in the future? That I haven't heard anything about this being on launch or anything. And have you guys? I mean, again, I'm just revisiting that old clip stuck in my head of some guy ice barraging another guy traveling. But just is this even something that you guys have been working on at all? And what are your, I don't know, just share what you have for me on PvP sailing.
Sure. So first of all, with that clip, like that, both those accounts are me trying to like ice barrage and make a GIF at the same time. It was actually really tricky to set up properly.
Yeah.
But yeah, good fun. It was actually also not like when I made the GIF, it wasn't intended to be a player facing thing. It was to prove internally that we got sort of like boat to boat interactions working. And the way I did it as well was like kind of hacky, like just hijacking the ice barrage spell and like rewriting it basically. So like for a very short amount of time, ice barrage didn't actually work outside of boats, if that makes sense. They only worked on boats. But anyway,
That's hilarious.
wild tangent. For PvP, it will not be there for launch. So like I say, that clip was meant to prove that we can do interactions between players on different boats. But we're not updating PvP for launch. One of the reasons is we don't even know what the PVM combat is going to look like just yet, right? Like we have something working, but as I said before, we're not happy with how it's working at the moment, and we need to iterate more over it and get it working better. And so the natural next step after that, I think, would be PvP, but I think that's going to be quite a big undertaking. That said, though, I've heard some really good ideas for like cool stuff that could be done with PvP. Like, I mean, I feel like I need to rewatch Pirates of the Caribbean basically, but I could just imagine like players swinging across from one boat to another and like shooting cannonballs at each other to try and like slow down the boat so that you could catch up and stuff like that. It'd be amazing.
Yeah, that would be. I don't know how I feel. I mean, obviously, I'm so Iron Man pilled. I just love Iron Man. So like PvP ultimately doesn't really speak to me as much as it does for a lot of other players. But I just find it so cool that you really have this completely fresh system where PvP on a boat can be perfectly tuned. Obviously, it's way easier said than done, but just the fact that you don't have to build off of a 25-year-old like structure of like, okay, this is how PvP's always been. How are we going to kind of patch it up a little bit, make it a little bit more balanced? Like this is like a fresh slate, which could be really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I've talked to a couple of people at RuneFest as well who asked me about this, who were really excited to talk about the potential for PvP on boats. And yeah, like I agree, it does sound really exciting, and it's not that we don't want to do it for launch, right? It's just that we have a million things that we want to do,
Yeah.
and so it's not been the priority because first and foremost it's a skill. But I think there's a lot of things that we could do with it in the future, and like I say, we just want to build solid foundations now that we can then build upon in the future. So I can definitely see PvP boats being a thing. I really like the idea actually of, because I was thinking about how loot and stuff would work. Like, what if you sink an entire ship? Like, not just kill all the people on board, but like you sink their ship. What happens? Like, what do you get as the PvPer who sank that ship? And to me, it almost feels like the loot from all the people, as well as the stuff in the cargo hold on that ship, would have had to be put in like a loot chest or something. And like that's how you would get it. But yeah, I'm not sure.
Interesting. Oh man. Yeah, that would be insane. Kill all on board and still just blow it up to smithereens and have it sink.
Yeah. And also, like, where would you do it? Like, would you say the ocean around the wilderness is PvP, or like how like where in the world would this be?
Hmm.
So I don't think we couldn't enable it for everywhere. Obviously, like people might not want to do PvP, which is completely fair.
This just came to my mind, and I'm just gonna share it. It's gonna sound so dumb, but you know how we have clan halls?
Hmm.
When are we gonna get clan yachts? So this would be obviously like, yeah, this would be like not a ship that's really moving. It could move slowly on the sea, whatever, but it's not about the movement. It's about getting all the boys together and partying on a boat. So it's like a POH party, but it's a
The
yacht
party
party.
boat.
But it's just
I
like
love
it's
that.
stupidly expensive. I mean, I'm talking like, you
Yeah.
know, this thing would be like 12 bill to just like have, and you know, like people want to jump on the yacht, and 12 bill would just be like the foundation of it, and then you got to spend another 20 bill on all the other things that you want, and just little demon butler servants giving you drinks and stuff. Like, when are we
That'd
getting?
be so cool.
Oh
What I
yeah.
really like about that is that it's because you mentioned the cost of it. Like, it's not just the fun fact of like your clan has a cool space to exist on, and it's out to sea and you can see other people and stuff, but it's also giving the clan this sort of like shared goal to work towards. Like everyone puts in money for it and
Yeah.
works on the clan yachts to like build it up. And it reminds me of I don't know if you're familiar with the citadels in RuneScape, but basically their clans have these big clan halls similar to ours, but they can actually upgrade aspects of it, and then that gives you bonuses to skilling in there and stuff like that. And while we may not want to go down the same routes, like the benefit that it has is that it creates that shared goal for your clan to partake in. And so, yeah, I think we could achieve the same, but without giving you like crazy boosts and whatnot, and just
Yeah.
having that shared space of, wow, this is like the clan yacht for your clan.
I would be all about that. And then, you know, let's just say you're just the only person. Oh, actually, I think you have to have like 5 people in your clan or whatever it is to start one. But just imagining just you're the only person left in your clan, but you just got this massive yacht to yourself. Like, I'm just gonna party on my yacht alone. No,
Yeah, yeah.
that would be funny though to see that. One of the
We
things,
did
yeah, go for it.
sorry, real quick. Earlier in development, we played around with the size of boats, and I mentioned to you earlier, like at the moment, the biggest one is 3 by 5, but at the time, we played around with stuff like, I think the biggest one we had was like 6 by 15 or something like that. Like it was quite big. And we can get that working. It's just it feels a bit too big for the areas that you can sail in.
Yeah,
But if we limit that to only being like really far out at sea where there isn't too much scenery around, and like it kind of makes sense. Like you think about real life as well, like the big tankers and like the big boats, like they only really go around like far out at sea anyway.
exactly. Yeah.
They're not gonna hug the coastline.
You're not going to be on a little raft going down the river on a yacht. That makes no sense. So,
Rock up to Lumbridge Castle, like
yeah. Yeah, I mean, that is cool to know though, that there is just so much more space with sailing. If people really wanted stuff, you know, if the community was all
yeah,
of a sudden like wanting bigger and better things, there's space for it.
the tech is there. The tech is there, and we can make it work. It's just a matter of like what do people want it to be, I suppose.
Yeah. So, one of the things I love about RuneScape and just games in general are Easter eggs. And when there's Easter eggs sprinkled out that nobody knows about, I just love that. I love the mystery behind it. And sailing is the perfect place to introduce random, like, bottles in the sea with a note that's going to give you a hint on something that you have no idea what it even means. You just think it's a piece of lore that you're going to destroy later, but ultimately maybe it's a little bit of a clue scroll that's actually an unofficial clue scroll that's going to lead you down these places, and you have to figure it out yourself, and then all of a sudden there's some crazy Easter egg. Have you guys been inserting the decent? I'm hoping you've been inserting at least a decent amount of Easter eggs across sailing from islands and underwater exploration potentially, and just whatever else. Is that
Yeah.
something that you guys have been focused on at all?
Yeah, definitely. 100%. It's one of those where towards the end of projects, that's usually when we have time for this kind of thing, because if you don't have time to do it on the project, like that is probably the most like the least important stuff, I guess, in a way. Like if you compare the rewards like working versus having an Easter egg, like you're always gonna focus on the more functional stuff, right?
Totally.
So these things tend to happen towards the end of the project. It's that and the fact that they tend to be like cheaper to implement as well.
Hmm.
Like as a developer, I could do 10 of those an hour, right? Like they're dirt cheap. Like it would be so quick to do. Um, we have a system called charting in sailing where you go around and you chart the ocean. And this gives you sailing XP, but they're also one offs. So it basically means that you go to a location and you use some sort of charting tool. That could be a spyglass or some other tool. And then you use that at the right location to kind of learn a bit about the ocean and the environment around you. Um, and this is all kind of gathered in this. It's almost like the collection log in a way, but just like easier, I suppose. It's just go to the place and like interact with something. Um, but you've got a big list of all of the locations and stuff to do there. But a lot of these have these little Easter eggs and the little like fun interactions around them to make them more interesting. So that's a whole system almost. I wouldn't say like dedicated to Easter eggs, but it's definitely enabling a lot of them.
Nice. What do you, so when it comes to Easter eggs, one of the updates I absolutely am just obsessed with. I think it's so cool that you guys introduced it. Was the helmet of the moon from the moon chest in Varlamore? Just like the silliest thing. It just the face turns into a crescent moon for no reason, and
Yeah.
it's so charming and it's so rare and it's so pointless, but it's just so cool to introduce things like that. And I wonder because I don't think I think most people are totally okay with it, but I can definitely imagine there's players out there that are, it's not in the collection log. How this is a separate thing. I would actually prefer stuff like that to be in the collection log. I think it's just cool. But there's this kind of like, how do you balance it? How do you make Easter egg stuff like that feel cool? Because you want it to feel somewhat noteworthy. You don't want it to just be like, oh, everyone can get this in 5 seconds if they just do something. But do you put it in the collection log? Should it have any stats to it? Should it like have any benefit whatsoever? Do you guys ever talk about that amongst the team when it comes to just simple little things like that that are thrown into the game unpolled?
A little bit, yeah. So when it comes to stats in particular, we have to be very careful because if it's actually meta impacting, um, it doesn't have to be on the top end either. It could be like some sort of niche PvP build or whatever, right? If it's impacting something like that, it probably needs polling. And if it needs polling, we kind of um sort of like reveal everything in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like the mystery of it is gone. And so that's why a lot of those things tend to be more so cosmetic. But I feel quite strongly that all those kind of things should be on the collection log. Like if that's a unique that you can get in a certain way, then that should be on the collection log.
Yeah, I think the only exception, in my opinion, is when it comes to PvP stuff. And I think for good reason, PvP stuff should be excluded because it just ruins the PvP activity. You're just going to get cloggers infesting it and they're not going to take it seriously. So that is like the one exception I like that's excluded from the collection log, and it makes perfect sense. And even though the super, super, super dedicated cloggers, the purists would say, no, 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 it has to be in there. Everything has to be in there. I still think it's a give and take, and I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's once again a shame, right? Like where a certain target audience can't have the thing because another audience is going to ruin it, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is the case with multiplayer games. What you mentioned with Easter eggs earlier, by the way, reminded me of something that I'm sure Husky would have loved to tell you about, and unfortunately, it's never gonna actually be shown to players. I imagine it's fine for me to talk about it now. Earlier in development, we had a closed alpha where we mainly just wanted to focus on sort of like how does moving the boat feel. We had a couple of like basic port tasks in, we had some charting, we didn't have Barracuda trials, we did have a very basic salvaging as well. So we had these three things and obviously navigation, and we felt like it was a bit empty. So we wanted to add some islands and like stuff for people to actually experience when they were going around and exploring and stuff. And so we added three small islands randomly around, so like near Tutorial Island, Port Sarim, and Musa Point, like around those places. Um, and then we had a final island with a chest on. And so a lot of people found the chest and then they realized that, oh, to open it, you need 3 keys. And to get the keys, you needed to like either go to the other islands to find the key on one of those. You needed to do some of the gameplay to get one of the keys from that. And so it basically like was a very soft way to get you to interact with stuff. And then at the end, you sort of got a reward from that chest. And what the reward was just a note. And it said to go and speak to someone in the crafting guild. And so you went to the crafting guild, and you got a bit of dialogue, and that was pretty much it. But we knew that this would probably, like, if it was put on the beta worlds, which was our intention at the time, we fully expected someone to kind of grab the cache and leak it, as in they would be able to see sort of like all of the game data without being able to sort of play it themselves. And they would be able to read through that and see, like, they might not, understand what happens when they read the note or whatever, but they might be able to see the note's name. And the note's name was something along the lines of EOC plans. but that would be such a troll for the people like stealing that cache, right? But for the people actually doing the alpha, they would have seen that upon talking to the crafting instructor about this, he would talk about how this crafting guild used to be booming and now everyone only comes here for his bank, and so he wants to create this evolution of crafting so that people will actually use his guild. And it was all just like one big Easter egg troll type thing. And I'm sad it never got to see the light of day in that sense. But at the same time, maybe the community isn't quite at that stage at the moment where that would be acceptable to joke about anyway.
No, that's 100% acceptable to joke about. That's hilarious. I think what would be so funny is to actually just Jagex make fun of themselves in a way and introduce a quest. I mean, I loved the like frog quest in Varlamore, just so silly and quirky and amazing stuff. But like, imagine just having a quest that's also just charming and funny and just this like. I'm just imagining the whole quest is about like some dark force in the world that's like trying to install EOC, and then we're like, what's EOC? Like, what is this? Like some conspiracy going on. Like the twirling mustache people are trying to implement EOC or something like that, and we have to defend against it. Like, what can we do? Something charming like that would be funny, but
yeah.
What?
No, definitely.
It is funny, like thinking back. Because I wasn't actually playing the game at that time. As soon as Wilderness got removed and Free Trade got removed in 2007, I just got interested in different games and didn't really play RuneScape until 2015, old school. But it really seems like EOC was the devs trying to genuinely create a bigger, more immersive game. And like to do that, they needed to, in their eyes, like expand from this archaic system of just point and click and that's it. And one of the sad things that we just see is like too big of changes to a game where people have been playing for a decade plus. It just doesn't go down well. Like you can't have these massive overhauls to things, especially overhauls, not just additions, but overhauls to previous systems. So with an update like sailing, it's obviously not the same thing because this is just purely an addition. And obviously, you guys are being extremely careful about the balancing across the game and making it still interwoven. But this is something I'll just bring up. Like, I've heard of things like massive reworks to smithing, for example, or where it would become basically unrecognizable. Some of the pitches on Reddit I've heard over the years and stuff like that. And ultimately, even though some things like that might make sense with these big overhauls to the game, ultimately I think it's actually going to just be a huge detriment to the game because it's too much, and there's so many players that are, they kind of play on and off, and they don't want to log into a game that's just like, what is going on? What is all this unfamiliar stuff? Like, this isn't what I wanted to log into. I didn't want to have to relearn how to do this entire skill or whatever. And do you have any thoughts, just personal? I guess this doesn't have to be like what the team thinks at all, because I know devs have differing opinions. But in my personal opinion, I think we just are playing patchscape, where like everything is just a bunch of hundreds of devs over the years, like just creating stuff, and everything is just a patch upon a patch upon a patch, and some of the time the update won't land, or it'll just cause some imbalances, and then maybe last case scenario or worst case scenario, you have to make like an alteration, like the blowpipe nerfs and nerfs like that. But it seems like massive overhauls never land with this sort of community. And I want to hear like your thoughts on just updates in general, and when things are too big in scope, or, is that a detriment in your eyes? What are your thoughts on all this?
I think I very much agree with what you're saying, really. Going back to EOC, like, in my eyes, the problem that they had was they were trying to expand into a direction that their existing player base didn't like. And so what they had was a game where they basically alienated their core fans. Like, the people who loved the game the most started not liking it anymore. And that's a big problem. Like, you might appeal to a different target audience, but you've kind of lost the trust from the people that you had already. Which is, for a subscription-based game in particular, a big problem. So I think, that was absolutely a mistake. On the bright side, I'm not sure if old school RuneScape would have happened if it wasn't for that. So, like, maybe there's a silver lining there. It clearly showed this need almost for things to go back to the basics. You want simpler things, and that's sort of the fundamentals that old school is based upon. And so I think that is something that is easy to lose track of sometimes. As a designer, you kind of always want your new thing to be shiny and really clever and thought out, right? When really a lot of the things in the game actually benefit from simplicity. This is something we've seen a couple of times where, like, something comes in, even if it's a patch, as you say, like a new update building on something old, like forestry, for example, was way too complicated when it first came out. There was way too much stuff going on, and people were confused and felt like they had to learn how to do woodcutting. That was just too much at once, I think. And so while a lot of the ideas were coming from the right place, it didn't work the way it was intended. And so that's a really difficult balance, I think, that we have to be very cautious of going forwards. And I think with sailing in particular, that is a learning that sort of we've had. I don't think anyone from my team necessarily worked on it, but we've obviously, as in worked on forestry, we've obviously seen what worked and what didn't, and are sort of trying to learn from that and go, okay, well, it was too complicated. Let's, when we introduce new systems, not introduce a bunch of different items with a bunch of different effects in that same way, right? Keep it more basic.
Mm-hmm. This is another random question I just have because, I have the pleasure of talking to a JMod, so I get this nice luxury of being able to ask a couple questions. But
Is this the Sae Bae agenda coming through?
yeah, not quite. I'm going to try to resist a lot of the agenda. I know some people are like, all right, really, you're going to take up your time to sharing all this? But this is a question I actually haven't asked, which is, we had, this is about bank space, so I just preface it by saying that, but like I feel like we had 800 bank slots back in 2013, and I don't know how many thousands of items have come into the game since then that are like relatively useful, but we are now like, if you aren't going to pay, 888 mil or whatever raw GP to get the maximum, I mean, you're only really looking at maybe 900 slots max or something like that. And if you're on the very top end, maybe I think it's like 1240 or something is like the top end. I mean, is there any real limitation to this bank space thing? Is there a reason behind limiting bank space so drastically? Is it like the engine can't handle it or something? Or is it just simply like we think it's a good philosophy in the game to have a limited bank space so you're always clearing things out? Or because I'm just wondering, like, at this point, would it be bad or would it even be feasible to just have like 2,000 bank slots across the board? Like, I'm very curious when it comes to banking. I mean, even if it had a cost associated with it, potentially, I wouldn't say keep going up the exponential ladder where now you're spending 2 quintillion for the next 40 slots at, 1940 to 1980. Yeah. But like, what are your thoughts on bank space? I just feel like there's so many items that keep getting introduced with every update. And it's like, it just becomes kind of like, okay, how am I going to navigate this next little bit of bank space that I don't have?
I definitely see the problem. I think we're not good enough at updating it in line with the amount of items that we introduce. I know that sometimes there's like separate storages that are done. Like Sepulchre is a good example of that, where you have all of the tools that you get for Sepulchre are also stored at the Sepulchre.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't actually have to keep any of that in your bank, which is nice. I'd like to see us do more of that when it's like localized items that don't actually need to be in your bank. Like, this is only used in this area, so I keep it here, kind of thing. Speaking for like about the purely technical reason for why it's like that, you kind of have to go back and look at the history of the game in a way, because this is a game that used to be played in your browser on dial-up internet. Like, the amount of data that this game transmits is very low compared to most games. And there's this philosophy in the development of it that we should try and keep that low as much as possible. Obviously, it's gotten a lot bigger with more items and stuff like that. We have expanded the bank in the past. But the more things that you store on the player, be that, data such as like how many collections you've got of a certain thing, or how many items you have of in your bank and stuff like that, the bigger the player save gets. And the bigger the save gets, the more data you have to transmit. So that means that not only does the servers have to, do more work in order to transmit all of that, but it also means that, the download for the game might get bigger. The amount of battery you use, for example, might be a bit more when you play on mobile and stuff like that. So like, all of these things are considerations when we add stuff to the game. But like I say, that is purely like the technical side of it, and maybe it's a bit of an outdated sort of development view of it. Most people are not playing on dial-up anymore, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So maybe it's fine to expand it a bit more. I'd need to talk to the engine team to know like what is feasible. There might be some limitations that I'm not aware of potentially as well.
Yeah, it was just always something that's on my mind because I understand like we are working with one of the clunkiest engines. It feels like, again, I don't know any actual specifics on any of this. It's just what I've been told my whole life with RuneScape. So we're working with the most archaic system of all time. We're trying to get it cleaned up somewhat, but it's just a lot of patch stuff. Like shout out Mod Ash for a lot of the POH cleanup and stuff. But okay, well that's interesting. Yeah, because that would bank space. It's like at this point, I mean, even I'm playing like my mid-level Ironman at this point, and it's just like I'm constantly battling with like, what do I keep? What do I not? And I'm like, why is this even something I have to think about? Like I just, it feels like just a pointless nuisance that I just have to like, what? I'm just imagining a game where we just have double the slots where I'm just never thinking about it until you just hoard way too much stuff where you're like, okay, let me clean up now, just random buckets, empty buckets and stuff like that, just yeah, so just
I can relate, but at the same time as well, like sometimes at least it's a nice sort of reminder to keep my bank tidy in a way. Like the amount
definitely.
of times I've ran out of space and gone, okay, time for a cleanup, and then I clean my bank and it's like, oh god, I have like 200 spaces now because I got rid of all this crap I didn't need.
Yeah. No, there is that for sure. Yeah. No, so there's a little bit more to talk on that, but I'll leave it at that for the bank space thing. I'm curious as well with your thoughts on integrity going forward and also power creep. I don't know if I ever quite captured your stance on those kind of things when we talked 3.5 years ago on our first episode, but like, it's so interesting seeing the game in 2025 in my eyes because one, it feels like a lot of integrity is kind of out the window. A lot of the good foundational integrity is still there for sure, but it feels like a lot of and this is not even just coming from the team itself. This is coming from the community's culture. I mean, it's just there's not really that much of a care for Ironman integrity. Really, it's just kind of like, just kind of do whatever you want, abuse things, alt whatever you're going to alt in the early Ironman stage. And there's just a lot of places where you can just shoot up really far if you abuse the wilderness or abuse some like Dolo Soul Wars and things like that, where back in the day we would have had a hard like stance on that. Like, no, like back in the day, I mean, you couldn't even get herb boxes from Nightmare Zone. It's like, that's like absolute no for Ironmen. And we just are in a completely different game right now. And, loot is through the window at a lot of places. And it just feels like things just aren't quite where they used to be. And a lot of that's integrity, but a lot of it's also this desire in the community as well for power creep. It's like, and again, it's not the entire community. The community is completely split on a lot of these different issues. And I've always held the view like power creep should be very, very minimal. But ultimately, when it's too minimal, people are like, what, this update is super overwhelming or underwhelming. We need better stuff. And so we end up maybe sometimes overcompensating. And then we just get some stuff that's like, whoa, okay, this is crazy now. The second best in slot. I'm just thinking of the Shadow at hand right now, but like going from the Sang to a Shadow is just an insane power creep. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on all this integrity and power creep and how you see it as a dev like yourself, not how the team sees it, but you.
It's a really difficult topic, to be honest, because as a dev, you have to consider not just, an update, like from an update to update perspective, which, to be fair, I think most devs will do, because for most devs, they're on a project and then they're on a different project. Like, you don't really have too much say or oversight into like the full roadmap, or like you might not even need to worry about what happens 10 years down the line, but to some extent we kind of have to in a way. Like, I guess my point is that we need to consider the power creep of what happens, what the game looks like now versus what it's going to look like in 10 years, in 20 years, and make decisions based on that rather than on an individual sort of project by project basis. And the first bit I was saying there is kind of just me trying to reflect on why it's happening more so on a project by project basis. But yeah, if we can kind of figure out like what we want our long-term plan to be, as in like I might want the best in slot mage gear to look like this in 10 years from now, right? How can we make sure that we slow down power creep enough for that to happen? As in, like, it doesn't get worse than that, at least. Or, like, by worse, I mean, like, overreaching that by a certain amount of time. Maybe that's going too granular, but yeah, sorry, I realize I'm kind of like all over the place when I'm explaining this, but I'm also kind of just thinking out loud. So
No, I mean, I like it. I appreciate like where you're like, because
oh,
these are just like the tough challenges with this game, and it's like
yeah,
an individual JMod doesn't have the power of
I don't have all the answers.
yeah,
Like, I could give an opinion on where I think we should be in 10 years' time, and how I think we should get there. But ultimately, as well, it's the community that decides, right? Like,
yeah,
we suggest things, and then the community says yay or nay. And like you say, sometimes the community wants a big power creep, and it's like, well, a part of us like wants to say, yeah, you can have that power creep now, and another part of us wants to say, um, like, no, this is too much, right? But
yeah,
if we say that, then people might not like the alternatives, and so we're ending up with this intended update with no real reward space. So there's that pressure of like, okay, well we need to get something out. So like, where do we compromise? And I think a lot of projects kind of end up in that space. And I know that like the natural player response then is just, but take the time you need, right? Like, just
yeah,
take all the time in the world. And while I would love to do that, the problem that we face is that we have updates planned weeks in advance. Like, we have updates planned months in advance. And so if you move one of those, you're going to have this like tidal wave effect of like every other update also having to shift just a little bit. And that's going to be a big impact on different teams because, well, if my update that was scheduled for say next week, right? Like, say I had an update next week.
hmm
If I suddenly couldn't submit that next week, I couldn't have that update go out. What are we gonna do instead? We're gonna have to release something because like we need an update a week. Like, that's what we do as old school. So we're probably not gonna have anything to go in that time. But okay, let's say that it's in a month from now. Well, we might not have anything ready for that either. But we have more time to figure something else out. So maybe we do put something else in there. Um, I realized that that became a wild tangent of just like, why can't we take more time on stuff? But my point is that that puts a lot of pressure on other projects when you have to move a project around.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but
I mean,
in terms of power creep, though, sorry, go on.
no, I was just gonna say. I mean, it's a business at the end of it. It's like the things need to move. It's not just like a passion project of devs and community. Like, this is a whole thing that needs to the ball needs to keep rolling. So it's definitely much more
Yeah, and,
complicated.
and it's not like, obviously like the business aspect and like revenue and stuff kind of matters to some extent, but like it really is more, at least in my eyes, it's more about the impact that it has on everything else. Like, we have
Mm,
a separate team, for example, just called the release team, and they handle sort of like all of the final checks of a build before it's ready to go. And they handle like the stream management of that. So like they make sure that, if you have say that you have like an update where you have a bunch of like feedback fixes from different types of content, then all of that needs to be merged into sort of the same build in order to get out. And so like that takes up a lot of time. That's a lot of work as well. It needs to be prepared. But anyway, this is like completely tangential to power creep. Going back to that, I don't think we are good enough at planning for power creep long term. I worry about sort of where we're gonna be, like I say, in 10 years. Like, we've already creeped a lot from where we were 10 years from now, or 10 years earlier. Like, compare compare a Grardor kill on release, right? Like when
Yeah.
Grardor first came out and God Wars came out. How difficult was that?
Oh
What was the
yeah.
best in slot? Like Barrow's gear, I
Like
guess,
a
unless you
whip and
already had
barrows.
bandos.
Yeah. Like
Yeah. And so like it's completely ridiculous how much that's changed from back then. And so in 10 years from now, is that just going to be AFK? Can I just like not look at the screen and kill guard or AFK while working? Like, do we want that to be the case?
yeah, it's so tough because like it makes sense for PVM to get more and more and more difficult and have the arsenal of your player get better and better and better. But there's also something about RuneScape that I was just saying earlier that's so cool and integral, where like you go to Lumbridge and you go to these old places and like it's a feel things don't feel like, oh, this is the level 1 newbie area that I'll never go back to ever again. It's not like there's games that are built like that where it's like as soon as you get past this area, you're never going back. It's just pointless.
Yeah. And
And
they do the same with gear, right? So like
yeah,
once you get an upgrade, like that previous piece of gear is now completely useless. Like it will never matter to you ever again. And I think we do a lot to try and prevent that. That's why a lot of the time we do side grades and we try not to power creep too much too often.
hmm,
And I think it kind of leans back into something you said a bit earlier about like when you come back to a game and you have to relearn stuff, that feels really bad. In a similar vein, if you come back to a game and now all the stuff that like once was best in slot for you is now kind of trash, that would feel really, really bad as well.
yep,
And so, yeah, these are all reasons for why power creep needs to happen slowly. But like, how do we achieve that? That is the tricky question. Like, how can we slow down? I think, and this is going to sound a bit weird, but stuff like sailing is kind of the solution in a way. So, like, big new systems for us to explore is a way to slow down power creep. Because think about power creep as like this graph, right? Like, you have a pillar graph that can only ever go upwards. Like, your slash attack bonus or your strength bonus can only go up or down. And that's, if you have a limited amount of those pillars, say like all of your stats for example, that's all you're going to care about. You're just going to care about like making those pillars go up. But instead, with sailing for example, and like that introducing new systems such as a new combat system as well, that creates essentially new pillars on that graph for you to think about and to consider. And so it doesn't matter if they start really low, because that that just creates new reward space entirely that you can then focus on upgrading. And so what that means is that instead of previously being focused on like maybe like a few pillars that you want to go up, you now have a broader spectrum of different pillars that can go up. And so that means that with us releasing updates at same cadence, we can actually spread it wider, which means that each individual pillar goes up slower. Does that make sense?
yeah. No, that's a good point. It's yeah.
So
It's
yeah, I guess the TLDR is to slow down power creep, you need to introduce new reward space.
Yeah. I I think the thing that's on my mind currently that's concerning is where magic is headed. I'm a bit worried. I think Yama sounds extremely exciting, especially because there's a new slash armor coming out from it, and it's tame. It's not out of control. It's not surpassing Torva. It will in some situations, but the strength is reasonable. It's at the stage where like Bandos and a face guard would be, but then it's got some good slash bonus, and I like that. I think everything honestly when it comes to magic is all centered around this shadow that dropped, and it's really really just too overpowered in a way, and it's really hard to balance other things. And I know obviously like you've been working on sailing, and so but this is me just kind of sharing, some of the updates that we're looking forward to this year, like Yama, and then we're getting the new Delve boss, which is going to give a bunch of magic upgrades. And it's just like, I get worried about magic in particular because there's just these multipliers that are just crazy. And I think the shadow needs to be re-examined like thoroughly and nerfed in a way where like after Delve comes out, technically the shadow will be like a hair better than it currently is right now. But I think right now, when all the Delve stuff hits and the shadow doesn't receive any nerf to it, I mean, there's just going to be like a melting machine. I mean, this thing just melts anything that gets into its path. It's just like really out of control. And that deeply concerns me because not everyone has a shadow. And so they want these nice little side upgrades, like the new tormented bracelets and these other things that are coming out. But I don't know. I think there's like things that need to be looked at, and I'm scared because like I don't think even if devs that are kind of in that wheelhouse want to do something, I don't feel like the community is entirely on board with those things. And nerfs always feel bad to players. Like the blowpipe nerf was just that was so dragged out. I mean, it was just Reddit posts screeching about, I finally got my blowpipe and now they're nerfing it. What is going on with this game? And ultimately it was for the health of the game. And I'm like, I don't know. I get worried that in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be at such a tipping point, especially when it comes to Magic, that we're going to have to do another like cleanup similar to the equipment rebalancing we did years back with the blowpipe and everything else. And that's going to feel awful. And I think we can like kind of, do a quick fix in a way with just looking at the shadow and making some drastic adjustments to it and making it not so like multiplicative. It's just out of control. But just
the
one of my
problem with the
concerns.
shadow is it definitely it gets stronger, right? Like with every other magic item that we introduce.
Yeah.
It kind of just inadvertently buffs the shadow. So I do wonder what we could do to affect that somehow. As you say, like maybe having a look at it in one of the is it called the summer spruce up, I believe, that we have coming up?
Yeah.
Like,
Yep.
having a look at it in either that or like, another similar sort of update where we revisit like gear and stuff like that would be good. My understanding is that we want to try and get that to be somewhat of a yearly thing because like, it comes with buffs and nerfs really, which like ultimately both are aimed at being good for the game, right? Like we're trying to preserve the long-term health of the game. So I think that's the perfect spot to look at that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is like completely off the top of my head, but with the shadow sort of like being buffed, I guess, or being affected by every piece of mage gear that you have, do you think there's any benefit to like restricting what items could affect it? Like, just off the top of my head, like what if you could say like, oh, this is a shadow ancestral top or something like that, like some sort of it's not attachment but like enchantment or something like that attached to certain pieces of gear that would make them affected but not other pieces of gear.
Yeah. I think the problem, and again, we've already touched on this, is just how it multiplies things by 3. And inside Toa, it's a 4, which is just, again, that's another issue that I think is just bizarre. Where I'll answer your thing, but I just want to make it known as well that I don't like how like the Fang is just more powerful in Toa and the Shadow is more powerful in Toa. Like it kind of made sense, really short-sighted in a way to be like, okay, yeah, this comes from the raid, it should be good there. But then it's like, if you don't have the Fang or the Shadow, you're looking like a clown in there because these upgrades are so drastic. It's just insane compared to the next best in slot. And
yeah, I think that's made worse by the invocation system in a way because you're kind of pushed to doing high invo stuff.
Yep.
And that's when you feel the effect of not having those upgrades.
Yeah, and that's and even like Shadow across the game. I mean, even before these new upgrades that are coming out this year, land, it's like when you go and kill Whisperer with a Sanguinesti compared to a Shadow, I mean, it's night and day. And that was literally the previous raid, best in slot, Mage Staff, the Sanguinesti. And then you have the Shadow, which is just out of control. I mean, it's just so much better. And in my perfect world, it would just be like, okay, let's just focus on what this Shadow can be. I don't even think in my world it needs to even have any multiplicative effect. It could just simply be a 10% increase over like the Sanguinesti. Just keep it very, very simple, very flat. It's not going to have any crazy impactful things later down the line. Yes, it'll totally reshape the metas on certain pieces of content for sure. Maybe the Shadow could have an accuracy buff, like a double accuracy, so it feels like it's still very accurate. So it doesn't feel like an entirely different weapon. But I think as soon as, because of what we have right now with the Shadow, and then it's like, oh, should we just make it so certain things work, certain things don't work? It just becomes more convoluted, and it can be a solution like you were offering, it just like a Shadow sort of ancestral thing, or just maybe make it so even if it was as simple as, this would still be kind of convoluted, but simple as like only mage armor, like legs, body, and hat will ever get that multiplicative effect. And every other accessory that you're wearing doesn't have any additional effect. It'll just have like the base thing, similar to how Augury doesn't triple. It just has the base. So it was just like select pieces of gear have that tripling effect. But even then, I'm like, we could just go back to the drawing board and figure out something that's not as egregious. But then again, this is me sharing my personal take on it. And some people just love melting stuff. And they're like, I play this game a little bit and I don't really care about, what's going to happen in the next 5-10 years. So I just want number to go up and let's just hit really hard and I don't really care. So it's tough.
Do you feel like, because it's a Raids mega rare, right? And it kind of completes the set of the three, so to speak. You have the T-Bow, the Scythe, and the Shadow. Do you feel like it kind of needs a gimmick? Because like the T-Bow and Scythe kind of do, and the Shadow has now the gimmick of being affected by the mage accuracy. So like, what your suggestion is making it just a flat bonus, but I wonder if it would kind of lose that extra feeling, if that makes sense. That feeling of this is like something special.
The cool thing about how the T-Bow and the Scythe work, because I definitely get where you're coming from, and it is cool to have like some sort of gimmick going with it. But the T-Bow, you just simply can't use it everywhere where you would normally use like a blowpipe or whatever. There's just places where the T-Bow is just going to look like a Nerf toy, just going to look so bad. And the Scythe as well. If you're not scything one by one enemies, you're just trolling. But Shadow is just different. Like the gimmick is so across the board everywhere it's good because it just has this insane power thing. And the gimmick is, you have to have best in slot mage stuff, obviously, to complete it. If you're just trolling around with mystics, it's not going to look super good. But I think it should have had a type effect where similar to the T-Bow, where you need a monster with super high mage. And so then the Shadow is only used as an extreme powerhouse in the big bosses. And then for anything else you're killing, you just pull out your Sanguinesti or your Trident because that's actually technically going to be the better option. And then you just have so much more variety in the future with this like new 3-tick wand coming out and stuff. But I don't know. I'm just not a fan of just the whole multiplicative effect that doesn't actually have any downsides really. Besides just your own gear. It doesn't actually depend on the monster itself.
Yeah, that's fair. And it's been a while since this was released, but just trying to remember sort of the intent behind it. From what I recall, the desire was to make it so that, these mage switches that people usually didn't care about, they would now become relevant, right? So like, no one really cared about Eternal Boots unless you were only maging. But Shadow made that kind of more relevant. And that is one of the pros of it. But obviously, as you say, it sounds a bit broken at the moment.
Yeah, and it's only going to get more broken. That's my worry. So we'll see. I mean, I try not to, I don't really lose sleep over this necessarily, but it's just that lingering worry of where we're getting. But like you said, and this is actually the next point I want to bring up, which is the OSRS roadmap for this year, which I have on screen right now. And so we got the Sailing Alpha coming out in the next couple weeks, hopefully, and then Yama in the spring, which just sounds so exciting because the Royal Titans was just a total banger of an update. Like universally, I feel like everybody loved it. And so this Yama, especially with Mod Arcane's remarks at RuneFest, which was like, we understand that we do not want to make content just that's overly exhausting. We want it to eventually become brain off as soon as you've gotten it all down, and the muscle memory clicks in. And so Yama, besides the contract, obviously there's the contract system, which is going to be way more difficult, but just the base Yama just sounds really fun. And you just need one other person to do it. You can solo if you're crazy, but that sounds great. And then Varlamore with the Delve boss.
I've done about an hour or so of playtesting of Yama. It was me and Husky trying it out for the first time, and oh my god, we got completely destroyed. It was difficult. And I'm pretty rusty. I've not played properly for a while. I think the last time was Leagues, probably. So yeah, I definitely felt that going into it. But we almost got it down. We didn't actually get a kill in that time either.
But you're talking about like your first ever run with it, right? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. No, Arcane actually, so Arcane was leading the playtest. It was just the three of us, and he sat us down, and he had a PowerPoint ready. He was like, these are the mechanics. Pretend I'm the wiki. And then Husky and I were like taking notes and stuff, and being good little students, and then we went in and got completely demolished. So that was fun. But yeah, no, I think he's definitely nailed sort of the multiplayer aspect of it. Like, it feels very different to Royal Titans, but it still very much benefits from being two people.
That's cool. It's so simple too. It's not. It's just one other person, So a lot of the time you guys design the game around just a solo sort of experience with the occasional raid and stuff where you can benefit from others. But this is something else, and I'm just so excited about it because I've talked about it on casts where I'll always bring up that old thing I remember of like Lake and Puggin doing duo Nightmare together back when there was no Fasanes, and they're just they look like they're figure skating because they were just so locked in and they just knew what the other was about to do. They could like anticipate he was going to kill the husks with the bulwark or whatever, and everything just looked so clean. And I love that sort of like, I call it figure skating. It's just like the figure skating dynamic where it's like, if you get a really good partner with you doing this, it's just going to be smooth. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. It's probably going to make me start playing again, to be honest.
Yeah. And then, I'll just go over the last four things, which is Varlamore is dropping, the Enrage boss, and all these new, like the new fletching activity, which I'm very excited about. Obviously, Trouble Brewing, I don't know if you knew, just got this crazy buff where like it was the new meta for Ironman to just like go chop trees and put their bark into this like random barrel of, I don't even know, but amazing. that got toned down, and I'm pretty sure it was because this new fletching activity is coming out to make it actually stand out. And then Summer Sweep Up, which you mentioned, and you said that's going to be more like a yearly thing. I'll let you butt in now before I continue on the last two.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I can't say 100% sure. I don't control what's in the roadmap necessarily, but I know there's a desire from a lot of people to sort of like keep looking at this every year. So,
do you have any insight onto what like the elemental weakness expansion will really entail and the drop table adjustments in particular?
I don't know about the drop tables. For the elemental weaknesses one, my understanding is that it's going to be quite extensive. Mudrice has been making a big list of stuff to touch up on, so
that's cool.
Yeah, I can't really go into depth about like which ones to expect, but my understanding is it's going to be a lot.
Okay. And then Autumn, is sailing. Do we have like I mean, is this kind of like a broad sort of range? I mean, could it be August, but could it also be like November, or like when are you thinking this will actually officially land?
Ooh, I don't know if I can say.
Okay. But you're
Um,
pretty sure that it will be this year. Like you don't think there's any going to be
yeah,
any like crazy
it's happening
hangups.
this year.
Okay.
It's happening this year. My personal preference is as late autumn as possible, just so I can get more time to make it awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we'll definitely announce closer to the date though, because like one is in the next few months, like we're gonna be more and more comfortable with the dates that we've set out for like different hitting different milestones and stuff like that. We're also gonna be, reviewing the public alpha. So like if for some unexpected reason that goes completely sideways, we might review what we're doing, right? But
Hmm.
at the moment, we have a lot of confidence in the build. We know that RuneFest went well, so we don't we don't expect any delays due to like public alpha stuff. That said, we have planned to take time to like address feedback and stuff from it, but we don't expect to have to do a full like 180 with anything.
Okay.
Obviously, we'll review things if they come up, but yeah. So that said, autumn this year, really exciting, very terrifying. I realized, by the way, by the time that sailing comes out, over half of my Jagex career will have been on the new skill project.
Oh
That's
my
pretty crazy.
god. That is
Yeah, and
nuts.
that's insane.
Oh, I actually never really asked this. I'll finish wrapping this up after, or just yeah, right after I ask this question. Like, when it came to sailing, were you kind of just assigned it, or was this sort of like an elective thing? Like, oh, I would like to actually work on sailing, so I'm going to put my name in, and I want to be part of the team that's working on this. Or is it really like, I don't know how it's delegated necessarily on Jagex's end to get devs to work on certain things. How was it?
So, typically, projects are just assigned to a team sometime in advance, and that usually just kind of lines up with what is the expertise on that team and when would we like this update, and sort of just looking at like, okay, which teams are actually available and capable of doing them, right?
Hmm.
um Before the new skill project in general, we had a big meeting with the design team where we kind of identified that the teams haven't been changed up in a while, and so we're kind of keen on creating a few new teams, like changing up who's working with who, trying to distribute that expertise a bit better, perhaps. Like if you have a few people who are really good at like PVM stuff and they're all on the same team, maybe that's bad because then you have like a bunch of teams without that expertise, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of want to distribute that evenly. And we had a big call about sort of like what people want to be working on and who they want to be working with, and kind of just talking it out loud between each other. And Kieran was spearheading that, so he is my boss and like the manager for most of the design team, and he, as the creative director as well, um, it does sort of lead all of that. So he oversees the entire design team. Did I say creative director? He's the associate design director. There we go. Sorry,
Hmm.
got my titles mixed up. Um, anyway, he's yeah, he was spearheading that, and so in that meeting, we could kind of see like which projects were coming up and uh, get to say like what we wanted to work on. And so I saw the new skill and I was like, that'd be really cool. I would like to work on that. That was after having worked on, or yeah, that was just after working on Guardians of the Rift. So I knew that I sort of, you know,
Well, so
have
long
a
ago.
decent understanding of skills. Yeah, exactly. I have a decent understanding of the game. I feel like I know what's old school, and like Guardians of the Rift worked out well. So I feel like I could use that as sort of not necessarily leverage, but like an argument, I guess, for the fact that that went well, so I should be on the team, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But there were quite a lot of people who were interested in working on that team as well. And then to begin with, it actually ended up only being myself and Husky from the design team, at least, who were on that project. So it was just the two of us starting out, and that was because we did the whole sort of like community consultation part of it, where we just went. I don't know if you remember, but it all started with a simple poll question of, do you want to scale, yes or no? And we
Hmm.
hadn't even we hadn't done any design before that. We didn't know what to do. We just knew that, we shouldn't spend a bunch of time on this if people don't want it at all. And so that was a yes. And so we started like creating pitches and doing like research into what players actually want from a skill. Like, and that was quite difficult as well because people want different things, believe it or not. Some people want the
What?
gathering thing, some people want production skills, and then utility was the most popular one. And what we saw with all this like data, like all of the surveying and stuff, was that generally people tend to like the more open-ended answers to things. So like utility could be anything, like Slayer is a utility skill. Agility is a utility skill as well, and they're like widely different. So like people tend to like that sort of stuff. Um, anyway, I realize I've gone on a completely wild tangent, but my whole point is that like there was a lot of work where we only really needed a couple of designers early on, and so it was just me and Husky for a while, and then since then, like once the skill actually passed the poll, we started scaling up the team because now we were actually about to like properly design things, as in like fully flesh them out and start implementing them as well. So up until sailing past the poll, we hadn't really like programmed anything. We hadn't made anything.
And little did you know it would be this much of a project. I mean, oh, maybe you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Maybe you
It's
understood, but I don't think you could quite capture it
I
at
don't
that
think
early
I
stage.
comprehended it fully. I knew
Yeah.
it would be long. Yeah, I didn't know it was gonna be this big.
And it also,
But
it
yeah,
seemed at
no
least,
regrets though. Like it's been really like a huge learning for me.
oh yeah, I
I've learned
bet.
so much from being on this project, both in terms of like how to run really long projects and really and like how to design completely new stuff. As in most of the time in our game, I mean taking Guardians of the Rift as an example again, I knew what we wanted to do with Guardians of the Rift going into it. Like before we even fully fleshed out the design, I knew that I wanted this to be a rune crafting activity where you go back to existing altars. Like that's what I wanted it to be, and that's what it became, right? With sailing, there are so many moving parts, so many unknowns that we had going into it that we didn't even know where to begin with some of it. And there was so much stuff where we had to just try something, see if it sticks, and try again because it didn't, right? And that's a completely new way of operating for us. It's kind of the process of making a new game in a way where you have to try things and fail kind of rapidly to figure out what works and what doesn't. But our team isn't experienced in that. We work on a live game, patchwork, as you say. So yeah, that was a completely new experience for everyone involved, not just me.
And what is the plan going forward after sailing drops? I mean, are you still glued onto sailing for the next couple of years with all the new sailing updates that are surely going to arrive, or are you kind of free from it and you can work on other projects? Or what do you ultimately want as well? I mean, do you want to just keep focusing all your energy on furthering sailing?
Good question. For me, I think well, I guess take the project first. So there will definitely be people working on sailing post launch, as in we have time scheduled for us to work on further updates like immediately after, as well as obviously like handling any post launch feedback and stuff like that. And we even have like more time than normal to do all of that stuff. So like usually you just expect people to have to spend like a few weeks after an update goes live to like deal with anything that comes up from it. But for sailing, that's quite a lot of time assigned to it. But
Mm.
we also have time assigned to just adding more stuff to it, like area expansions, new islands, maybe add like another Barracuda trial, like stuff like that.
Yeah.
But as for myself, like whether I'll be on it, the honest answer is I don't know. I think a lot of people probably expect me to, and I could go either way. I would like to be on smaller scale updates for a little bit because I kind
Yeah,
of
just a
from like
while.
something this big. Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether that be Elena go make this island, or whether that be Elena go help on raids, like who knows?
Yeah.
I say raids. Raids can be a big project as well, so maybe that's not the best example, but I guess my point is that it would be nice to work on something else, but if I'm asked to stay on sailing, I will stay on sailing because in a way, it is my baby at the same time.
Yeah.
I do care a lot about the content.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it would be bizarre to just completely shift away from it because even if you're working on smaller projects, you know so much about sailing that you're like obviously going to be a huge help to like any furthering of sailing. So
Yeah. Yeah, and like the development speed is quite important as well, right? Like you
yeah,
get someone who's actually developed on sailing before, they're gonna develop sailing fast. Or faster than someone who hasn't.
yep. Okay, so I'll wrap up the rest of this roadmap, and then we'll probably wrap things up as well with this conversation. But looks like again, I'm not the one focusing. We'll just briefly touch on Dead Man's coming out in the winter, which not my strong suit, of course, but exciting stuff. And then HD and API is coming out. And so I'm assuming this is going to be 2026-ish, which, by the way, I just have one quick point on this. So one of the things, I'm so nitpicky with this game because the game's so good. I'm only picking out the nitpicks, you know what I mean? So like, when like you're running to an area and you see a door or a gate that you want to open, but the place is loaded up, but just the actual click boxes of all those things haven't loaded up yet. So you almost have to get pretty dang close actually to actually start interacting with doors and stuff. It just depends on like where the next chunk load up is kind of. I wonder, and you might not even be the person to ask this, but I'm just curious, like, is that going to be also adjusted with this sort of like HD and API changes? Because what it sounded like, at least I saw some clip or some video of Jagex kind of talking about, there's going to be more of a seamless load with the game, and so it's just going to feel like things are more, I don't know, just less clunky with all these. Obviously, there's the visual updates and everything else, but I was under the impression that maybe something like that would also be changed, where like if you can see something, you can probably click it because it's loaded it up. But I don't know do you have any thoughts on that, or do you have any info?
Um, I don't know is the short answer. I can talk to what I think might be happening though.
Sure.
So with the interaction thing you mentioned, what I think might be happening is our base client doesn't actually render things in as far as Runelight does.
Yeah.
And so you should be able to click anything that is rendered into that client. And what Runelight does is like Runelight kind of remembers what's beyond what's rendered in. So it guesses at what to show you. So the reality is that's Runelight sort of simulating what's supposed to be out there. I think they call it map stitching.
Yeah.
And apologies to Runelight if I'm completely butchering this explanation, but that's my understanding of how it works, is that they're simulating based off of like what they believe the map should look like there. So that's why you can see trees that are meant to be there, and then you might come closer and you might realize that, oh, that tree is actually chopped down, or that gate is actually open even though it looked closed earlier. That's because like the state of it hasn't actually been like transmitted to your client yet. Whether that will be part of the HD and API updates, I'm not quite sure. My understanding is that instead of loading in as big as the chunks are now, like that might change potentially. But yeah, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay, because that
I think
would.
what I'm.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No,
I was
go
going
ahead.
to change the topic slightly.
Well, I was just going to say that would be just such a huge improvement. I feel like I'm constantly noticing that throughout the game, especially early on when you're just having to explore a bunch of areas and doing quests and stuff. And again, it is kind of RuneLite. It's a RuneLite problem where RuneLite's doing you a favor by showing you so much more than you would have normally seen. But it's just like you have to wait for the actual game to register, and then you can open the gate to West Arty. Like, I swear that's the one place where it's like I'm constantly yellow clicking on it until I swear I'm like 8 tiles away, and then I finally actually red click it. I'm like,
really?
what is? Maybe not eight.
That sounds strange.
Yeah, but it's
Maybe
just like there's certain
wrong
areas where it's like it almost like you need to get so ridiculously close, it feels like, to finally start interacting with something. So
that could be the chunk not loading in yet.
Yeah, it has to.
Potentially. I think if they do update that so that the chunks are, or the area around your player is more continuously updated rather than load in entire chunks, like that would help. But if that's in the cards or not, I don't know.
Okay. And what was the last?
What I was going to say earlier.
What were you going to say?
I'm so excited to get these plugins on mobile. That's what I'm excited about.
Yes.
Oh, it's going to be sick.
So hub. So is this going to be? It's not quite RuneLite, but it says hub for community plugins. So does this have to be specifically designed for mobile, or is Jagex going to take the transferring of it? Sort of like, how is that all going to work? Do you know?
So I don't know too much about the specifics. My understanding is that the work that they've done so far has been involving a lot of the plugin makers from RuneLite. So they've been talking to a lot of the people who have been making popular plugins on there and just seeing like, okay, what do we need to do in order to make it as good as like what you guys have been doing this whole time, right? Like, can you help us basically make this awesome? And they've been super great. Like, they've been really, really helpful. My understanding, and this might be wrong, but my understanding is that the way that the plugin hub will work is that developers will need to sort of like register as a developer, I guess, and submit a potential update to that plugin hub. And then Jagex will then need to like approve those plugins. And I guess that there will need to be some sort of standard set for like what they're allowed to do, what they may change or what they may not change, and how it looks both on desktop and mobile, I'm guessing.
Okay. I'm excited for it because, I mean, I don't really play much mobile, but man, the difference between what I remember mobile being when I was first playing it, when like year one of it dropping, versus now, it is such... It's so pleasant getting on mobile. Actually, I'm just not used to it. It's not like a habit that I've formed to just log into mobile all the time. I'm usually at my apartment anyway, so I can just get on the PC. But like, man, it's nice. It feels good playing on it. So the plugins are just going to make it even better.
It's changed a lot. I remember back when mobile was first coming out, and they were doing these like beta tests. You could sign up, and like you might get picked as one of the beta testers for it. And I remember I was in uni at the time. I didn't work at Jagex or anything. I was in uni at the time, and I got the email that I was like one of the people who got chosen for this beta test, and I was so excited, right? So I jump on immediately, and the first thing I do is try a raid. So me and a friend, we were doing this duo raid, and I can't say for sure, I don't know 100%, but I like to think that I was the first person to do a raid.
Wow, you actually completed it. You didn't rage quit?
Yeah.
Like that.
No, I did it. I might have gotten carried by my duo, but I did complete it.
That's impressive. Yeah, it was.
Thank
It's much easier these days to do. I mean, I've been seeing mobile Inferno completions and everything. People are doing some crazy stuff.
People are really good. I couldn't do that, honestly. Like, I was struggling at the time as well. Like, because like I hadn't played it on mobile before, you know. Like that was literally within the first like 10 minutes of me getting it. I was like, okay, right, let's go to raids. Like,
that's awesome. And then the last thing on the roadmap I'm looking at, besides just quality of life and polls and seasonal events, is the project Zanaris. And we'll just briefly touch on this. I just want to hear your overall thoughts. I think that would be interesting. I know my audience would be kind of curious what your take is on it, because it seems like there's this somewhat fear of Project Zanaris being maybe like a lot, but then I hear more tame takes, which is like, oh, it'll just be, for fun. Like content creators will make some fun hosting service, you can get on it. But then there's also the potential long term, when I was talking to Gentle Tractor late last year, of really having some crazy customization years down the line, where you're just creating maps and stuff and completely from the ground up, creating your own little server that's RuneScape based. I mean, it's just got like that old school feel and system working, but you just are going to have so much customization. And that's when, maybe the player base will start diversifying into these other servers. But then there's so much more to talk about, which is like, what about cheating and what about abuse that's happening on other servers? Is that going to be moderated by Jagex? Are there going to be, because I remember Matt K, even again, Matt K's not on the team, but some of the things he was kind of hinting at was potential like subscription services, where like if you're the host of this thing, you're paying Jagex, but then people are maybe paying you a little bit of that cut to run the service or something like that. Like, is this going to be kind of the road that will go down inevitably almost? But it's not going to start that way, obviously. There's going to be very bare bones stuff. But like, what are your thoughts on all this? Are you kind of scared a little bit, like some of the community, or are you kind of just all excited about it?
I'm not scared. I'm quite excited about it. I think it's got a lot of potential. So I think my initial fear when I first heard about the project a while back was that it would split the player base, and that we would have, too few people playing the main worlds and all people like on different little servers kind of playing their own little version of RuneScape. I don't think that's too much of a concern anymore. We might see a bit of it, but I think it would be probably more similar to leagues in a way, where now and then a community server would kind of take off and people would kind of like flock to that one a little bit, and then the hype would die down and most people would probably just go back to the main game. And I think the role that the main game will have is just that like stability and the um the feel of your progression sort of like never being wiped or anything, like you
Mm-hmm.
have all of your gains are always going to be there no matter what. Whereas on the community servers, like that might not happen potentially. Like I don't know how people are going to run them, but I could see community servers like being intentionally reset every week, for example, and it's like a race to get to the highest level in that time, or something similar. So yeah, I'm not concerned about that anymore. Like I say, I was initially, but then yeah, um, that rationale kind of took over. And what Gentle Tractor said about community tools as well down the line, that is really exciting. I think that is sort of what gets me the most excited about the community servers, because if players can make actual in-game content, not just set the rules for what is allowed to be done in the world, but they can actually, update the models. They can create dialogue. They can, script different interactions. Suddenly, that becomes almost an entirely different game. But the benefits of that as well is that like it keeps it evergreen in a way. Like if you, because some people play old school constantly and they feel like not enough content is being added. Well, it's like we talked about earlier, some people struggle to catch up and feel like too much content is being added.
Yeah.
So that there's different types of players for sure. But for the people who do feel like there's not enough content being added, there's going to be so much more content because you can just jump on community servers and try what players have made instead. And while that might be, of varying degrees of quality, obviously, I think there's going to be some gems, definitely. And the benefit of that as well is that if those community servers are well liked, if the content on there is really good, say that someone makes Raids 4, right? Or someone makes a new boss and like every player who tries it really loves it, we could pull it and just bring it into the main game if it's that well received.
Yep.
Like we could do stuff like that. So that's giving me a lot of hope and excitement for the future, and I think it's going to be a really good way for old school to expand as well. And I'm hoping that it could include, or like could potentially attract people who might not be that into old school at the moment, but might be keen for more like modded experiences, if that makes sense. Like a lot of people drift to Minecraft or like modded Skyrim and stuff like that just because they want to create, not because they want to necessarily play it as much themselves.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's again one of those things that we just don't really know until it drops and until it evolves. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, there's a lot to be excited about, and ultimately, I'm loving the game where it's at right now, and I've been playing old school for a decade now, and just to feel like, I mean, I'm playing on this new Ironman that I started back in November, and I am seriously more addicted than ever. Like, I'm just having a great time. There's so much content, as I mentioned earlier. Hunter Rumors has just been so much fun, and there's just like there's just so much diversity now, which can sometimes seem overwhelming, but in this game, it's like, and maybe it helps because I just know the game inside and out in a lot of ways. So I kind of know different paths I can take, where maybe a new player is just like, what do I do next? What is going on? But for me, I'm just having the time of my life playing right now, and that's a really, really good sign. So even though I have my nitpicks, even though there's concerns I have, I'm like very trusting of the dev team, and like just the fact that you would come on again today and chat with me for 3 hours about what's really going on. It just like you radiate passion for the game, and like you're just so willing to come on and speak. I mean, because a lot of the community is going to listen to this and just be, just happy that we're kind of in good hands, it sounds like. And it's just cool. So I really appreciate that you've been working really hard on the game, and I'm excited for sailing and we get to see all the hard work you and Husky and everybody else on the team has been putting in. And I'm just looking forward to all that we have planned. So
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a really lovely chat, and I really appreciate this opportunity as well. I think, as a dev team, I guess we go on Q&As, we go on these like stage calls a lot, and we do speak to the community a lot. But I do think there's something more, I guess, personable with these kind of conversations. You get to dig a bit deeper and really dig into the weeds of things. So I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for having me on.
yeah, my pleasure. Okay. For those listening, if you guys want to support the cast, of course, there's a Patreon and a YouTube membership link, as well as a Spotify, which is another way to directly support and access exclusive episodes down in the description. But I'll also have Maud Elena's socials down there. And thank you once again, Maud Elena, for your time today.
Happy to be here. Thank you.